we're driving through this little area, and I'm not paying attention because there's nothing in front of me, and the only person behind me is our security vehicle. And all of a sudden, like, just feel this huge explosion. And I remember telling myself, "You're dead." My name is Cory Carranza. I served in the United States Army and the United States Marine Corps from 2000 till about 2007. So I'm from a small town in Southern California called Banning. Banning is like in between the Inland Empire and the Coachella Valley. It was a super small town back then, still kind of a small town now, slightly bigger. But that's where I was born. For the most part, that's where I was raised. That's kind of where the majority of my childhood took place. One of the most impactful things that happened to me as a very, very young child, I was around about 3 or 4 years old. We were living in Banning at the time. It was me and my mom, and we were at a friend of hers house in Banning, and it was her and her kids. And we were just hanging out one night, and two gentlemen broke into the house and sexually assaulted my mom and her friend in front of me and her friend's kids. At the time, I had no idea what was going on. All I knew it was all bad because obviously there's crying and screaming and all kinds of essentially, chaos, carnage going on. But as a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, however old I was, I vividly remember, and to this day, I remember what the guys looked like. And like I said, they broke in. They did their thing. They didn't interact with the kids at all. I remember one of the other kids was crying, but again, it was like this crazy fucking thing that happened super early in my life, and I don't remember crying. I don't remember being like super duper upset about it or anything like that. I just remember, wow, this happened, and I'm pretty sure this is fucked up. But it's just me and my mom. And to my mom's credit, my mom's one of the toughest people I've ever met in my entire life, just, especially when we were younger. She just handled her business, and I'm sure she had really bad moments afterwards and stuff, but I don't ever remember her using that as an excuse as to why something happened later on in life. I don't ever remember her ever really talking about it very much, at least to me or around me. She kept it, G-code, to say the least, took care of it. And again, I'm sure it affected her life, but even as an adult, she's never really talked about it a whole bunch, and I'm sure it affects her, but she kept it in. She just kept pushing on because, well, what are you gonna do? It wasn't going to help her at all. Wasn't going to help me at all if she dwelled on it. The individuals that committed this, as far as I know, they were never held accountable for what they did. I don't think they were ever arrested or anything like that. I don't remember my mom ever going to court. She's never mentioned it since then, so I would speculate that nothing ever happened. But again, this is the early '80s. A lot of shit happened, and things went unreported. Things went unsolved. So that was just one of those things that was, when I look back on it now as an adult, pretty fucking crazy, to say the least. I think it caused a callous, It made me a little bit more, or a lot more actually, maybe numb towards traumatic events. I think, or I know that when you're exposed to traumatic things, especially when you're younger, you tend to just, learn how to, I don't want to say put up a shield, that's kind of a cliche, but that's essentially what happens. You learn how to suck it up. You learn how to compartmentalize. And that's been the name of my game since probably then, because I still do it to this very day, although I'm a lot better at it now through different trials and tribulations and whatnot. But again, it just caused me to be a little bit more callous, a little bit more numb, and a little bit more, oh, well, yeah, that's shitty, but not as shitty what happened the other day type of a deal. Some other things that happened as I was growing up, we didn't have very much. We had basic stuff. It was just me, my mom, and then my younger brother Joshua was born a couple years later. I was like 4.5, almost 5 when he was born. My dad wasn't part of my life initially. He was in the area, but out of the picture. I just remember kind of being, I don't want to say the man in the house, but the oldest kid in the house. So I had to help take care of my brother. My brother was little, I'd change his diapers, those types of things. So we grew up in low income, and we just handled our business, and my mom worked a lot. Those are kind of the deals. When my dad finally later on did come back into my life when I was like 7 years old, he was married at the time, and him and my mom weren't together, but kind of just the way things worked out, they ended up getting back together. But that was super tumultuous. There was a lot of crazy shit going on. My parents were both addicted to drugs at the time, or did a lot of drugs at the time. And that showed. I remember me being with my dad at his mobile home in Loma Linda. I remember walking into his room and seeing what eventually I realized was like a methamphetamine pipe. And my dad wasn't like like a crazy drug addict out in the street. He still maintained, woke up every day, went to work, handled his business, but I knew that was wrong. I knew that was bad. But again, I just ignored it. It wasn't that big of a deal. Having my dad back in my life, that definitely threw a wrench into how I was living. I was a little boy being raised by a woman, and it's a little different when you're a little boy being raised by a woman versus being a little boy and being raised by a grown-ass man. So getting spanked by my dad and that kind of stuff was definitely a wake-up call, and it put the fear of God in me and made me realize, like, hey, although your mom whooped your ass, your dad whoops your ass a little bit better now. So I always had to remember that if I'm going to do something bad, that's going to require an ass whooping, I better make sure that it's worth it. So it kind of created this thought process that I kind of used throughout my life that my drill instructor told me back in the day was like, pain retains. So there's a consequence to everything that you do, and whatever you do, you better make sure that it's going to be worth taking that consequence for. There was some domestic battery that happened in there. When people are on drugs, they're not really of the right frame of mind. And when there's all kinds of other stuff going on, my dad was kind of going back and forth between his ex-wife and my mom. So that, brings up another bunch of emotions. But I remember being around when that happened. Like I remember them getting into fights and my mom crying and then her having bruises on her face the next day, those types of things. There was a story where I was at an apartment complex and my mom's cousin Dee Dee lived next door in an adjoining apartment complex. In between these two apartment complexes, there was just a fence, and there was like a little rut where the kids could go from one apartment complex to the next. I remember my mom's cousin was watching me, and she said, "Hey, Cory, can you go over to so-and-so's house next door, or so-and-so's apartment next door in the other apartment complex? Give them these two-liter bottles of soda, and she's gonna give you something. Bring it back over here to me." And I'm like 8 years old, so I'm like, "Yeah, sure, no problem, Dee Dee, I'm gonna go over there and do that." So I go over there, go to this lady's house, give her the two-liter bottles of soda. She gives me this envelope, and it's just a regular letter envelope. I go underneath the fence to go back to Dee Dee's apartment. I look inside of it, and it's got drugs inside of it. It was like methamphetamine, basically, is what it was, or speed, or whatever, coke. And I was like, oh shit, this is drugs. But whatever. So I just go back, give it to Dee Dee, and she was all happy about it. And she went and did her thing, and I went back to watching Ninja Turtles, playing Nintendo, whatever it was. And I knew it was wrong, and I knew it was something that I shouldn't be doing. But I was a little kid, and hey, this is just the life that I was living at the time. These are the things that I was exposed to. So yeah, so I was about 8 years old. My little brother was probably like 3. So yeah, around about that time, early 90s, late 80s. And I remember my mom's cousin Dee Dee, she was a drug addict. I remember she had a boyfriend, and I remember they'd be up all night long, like playing electric guitars and stuff. And I remember being in the apartment trying to sleep. I remember, playing video games until 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning with them because they were probably high. And it was just, it was crazy. But, to me, it was just the way life was. I knew that eventually I'd go back to my apartment, be my mom, and hopefully my dad and my brother. I remember it was around that same time frame. My mom and dad were kind of back and forth, and they had kind of broken up. And my mom had a male friend over, and I thought it was super cool because he rode a motorcycle. So it was me, my brother, my mom, and then her male friend. My dad was out of the picture, I guess. I was asleep, and I heard a commotion from the living room. What happened was my dad had broken into the apartment, beat the shit out of this guy. The guy left, and then him and my mom got into a fight. Well, the downstairs neighbor, one of the older boys from down there, came up and essentially threatened my dad with a firearm. And it's the only time that I'd ever seen my dad back down from anybody. My dad is 62 years old right now. My dad's one of the only people that I would probably never want to pick a fight with ever to this very day. And I've been in a ton of fights. And I've never seen him back down from anybody. That was the only time, one and only time I've ever seen it. So it was a pretty serious situation. But again, it was just, to me, it was Tuesday. All I cared about was my parents eventually getting back together and everything being fine. Me being able to wake up in the morning and have both my parents there. Whether we had a lot of stuff or not, whether we were rich or poor or anything like that, all I cared about was just being part of this family, having stability in some way, shape, or form. And I would guess that's how any child is, or any person is in general. And that's just something that I always wanted, and it was just something that kind of naturally came. Just being a kid, you just want to have your mom and your dad and just have some sort of harmony there. So my parents finally reconciled. They got back together again, and they decided to basically get their shit together, for lack of a better term. My dad's a union iron worker. Has been one since he was 18 years old. He's 62 now. So he got with a company that was traveling out of state. So he packed up his stuff, and he moved to Joliet, Illinois, where there was this job. He was going to run a crane and run a crew out there. So we stayed behind in Banning for a little while until we were able to get enough money, or my dad was able to send us enough money to where we could travel there. We didn't travel by plane, we didn't travel by train, we didn't travel by car, we traveled by Greyhound bus. So that was like a week-long experience where we went from like Southern California, Banning, all the way to Joliet, Illinois. And it was the middle of the goddamn summertime. It was hot as shit, and there was all kinds of, crazy things going on in between when we got on the bus to when we got to where we're going, from sleeping on the floor inside one of the bus to having all kinds of crazy individuals that were on the bus. My brother and I had no toys. It was just he and I. He was 3, I was like 8. And, we would just talk or read books or color books or whatever it is and look out the window. We didn't have cell phones, none of that kind of stuff. So definitely a product of our time then. But again, it was no big deal for us. We didn't have anything really much at home, and we didn't really have much then. So we went from Southern California to Joliet, Illinois, and traveled around the country for like 2 years. Lived in all kinds of places, like lived in Seattle. I lived in Spokane, Washington. Lived in Youngstown, Ohio, which is like on the border of Pennsylvania. It was super cool. My parents, although they weren't doing drugs. My dad drank a lot, and there was always some crazy shit going on, it seemed like, and they would fight a lot or whatever it was. But to their credit, they busted their asses, especially, my dad worked his ass off every single day. And although we didn't have a whole lot, he always made sure that we had what we needed. And I remember, even though it was very tumultuous at times, I've been to a lot of cool places around this country because of that. We learned how to read a map, which helped me later on in my military career. After traveling around, he moved back to Banning, California, come back from where we came from. We lived in Beaumont, which is the sister city. Go through school, get into high school. I got really involved into football. I was a big baseball kid, but then when I started playing football, that was my thing, man. Lifting weights and playing football. A good friend of mine, Anthony, we were both on the offensive line. I played center, he played tackle. We were good buddies, big weightlifting buddies, football buddies, and everyone that's on the football team, you become, super, super intertwined. He was always like a shit talker and like a funny guy, and was like a cool kid. He played in the band. And it was my junior year. I was like 17 years old, and I just noticed like he was a little bit off. Nothing too crazy. In retrospect, I realized that he was more off. And I remember at the time I had long hair that was bleached and braided. I remember him telling me how cool it was, and it was just one of those things that was kind of uncharacteristic of him. We leave, come back to school the next day, and we find out that Anthony had committed suicide. He was super depressed, and he had gotten in an argument with his girlfriend. He had committed suicide. And I remember other classmates, other friends that we had grown up with were just up in arms, like crying and screaming and all kinds of stuff. And although I missed my friend, and although it was a horrible thing, and I knew that it was a horrible thing, like I didn't cry about it. I didn't, pretend to be super duper, depressed about it. It did hurt me. It hurt my heart. But again, it was part of that callus that I created. Learn how to deal with fucked up situations, be the stronger person for people can go to you, and that's kind of how I felt about it. And that's what we did. Me and a bunch of my buddies from the football team, we got together, and a bunch of the other kids that we grew up with. We had a car wash, raised money for the family. Got pretty close with Anthony's family, and helped them as much as we could. But I just remember that was a very impactful thing for me personally, because it was suicide. You're young, and now all of a sudden, someone died and was no longer with you. And it wasn't like they got hit by a car. It was because they died because they were just so depressed and they couldn't take it anymore. And little did I know that, later on in life that would kind of play out as I get into the military and so on and so forth. But that was a very impactful thing for me, especially as I was getting ready to kind of move on to an adulthood. And still to this very day, it affects me, not in a negative way, but in a positive way, because I remember the times that I had with him. I remember the good times, and I remember that it was, a great example or perfect example, especially at the time, that, hey, things can be good today and tomorrow it can go just like that. So you got to be able to make sure that you tell everybody that you know that you love them before, because you never know what may happen tomorrow. So So I'd graduated high school. I didn't do good enough, or I didn't apply myself well enough in high school to go to college, except the junior college. So I enrolled in a junior college. It wasn't working out for me. I wasn't being held accountable. And so I quit junior college, and my dad was like, hey, you got to do something, man. You can't just sit around and do nothing. So like the next day or 2 days later, I drive my ass out to a recruiter. So I lived in Beaumont at the time. I drove to Redlands, which is where the recruiting office was. There was an Army recruiter there. I believe I had a relationship with this guy at some point in time. Like maybe I talked to him because I remember there was something there. But I said, hey, man, I want to join the Army. Let's do this thing. We started talking about jobs, and this is a Clinton era, military. So it was, there wasn't a whole lot of jobs available, at least. It wasn't like you can be a Navy SEAL, or hey, you get to go to jump school, or you get to be a Special Forces guy, or whatever it is. We're going to get you a Special Forces contract. It was like, hey, bro, you want to be a water purification specialist? You get a $2,000 bonus for that. And a water purification specialist, like, what do I think? Like, anybody who's my age is like, oh, that's from In the Army Now with Pauly Shore, man. Like, I'm not going to do that fucking job. There's no way in hell. Nothing against those people, trust me. But no, I was like, no, I need something that I'm going to be able to apply when I get out. At the time, I wanted to be a firefighter. I was like, is there firefighting? No, there's no firefighting. Well, what about medical? Oh yeah, there's like medical specialists. You can be a medical specialist. All right, cool, let's be a medical specialist. I had no idea what a medical specialist was. I know it was a medical field, and maybe I could use that as I got out. Later on down the line, I realized that the medical specialist field at the time, I can't remember the numerics. I want to say it was like 91 Bravo, was a combat medic or a field medic, okay? So I enlisted on September 25th of 2000, and I was gone by October the 1st, like flying my ass out to South Carolina for boot camp on October the 1st. So here I was, a dirty, nasty civilian on Monday. 4 or 5 days later, I was a dirty, nasty boot nobody in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Even before I got there, when I was in boot camp, going through the boot campus like that, like everyone, you're so hyper-focused on just getting through boot camp. You don't give a shit about anything else, And in the Army, you have some of the other MOs like infantry and artillery. It's a straight through. So you start from boot camp knowing you're going to be a grunt throughout the entire time, or a cannoneer or whatever it is. Here, it was like general boot camp 101. So like we had truck drivers and fucking, nurses and medics and, all kinds of other stuff that were in there. And so we were just kind of doing our thing. And it wasn't until I got to Fort Sam Houston, Texas, which is like the Army Medical Corps place where everyone's being trained from dirty medics like me to, operating room technicians to x-ray technicians to nurses to probably doctors and shit, man. But yeah, you get there and it says, combat medics. And you're like, oh shit, like this is the guys that put the bandages on the bullet wounds and when they scream for medic and that kind of stuff. That's what it is, which was pretty cool, so. So Army boot camp, it was definitely a culture shock. I wasn't prepared for it. I didn't do anything physically to get prepared for it. I lifted weights in high school, so I was pretty strong, but I had shitty cardio. So I was like, okay, well, whatever. I'll figure it out when I get to boot camp. Running around and everything. I remember getting to reception, and it was everybody from everywhere. And I remember we were getting all of our stuff set up, getting our uniforms. We were getting our direct deposits. We were getting our bank account set up, and I had forgot something at the barracks where we were at. So we had some corporals that were in charge of us. So I took my partner and I ran back to the barracks, grabbed whatever it is I needed, and I was running back to where we needed to go. And I got stopped by this non-commissioned officer. I think he was like a staff sergeant, and he just started yelling at me because I hadn't shaved. And I wasn't used to shaving every single day. Like I had only been shaving for like fucking 2 years prior to that, so I wasn't used to it. And before I joined the military, again, I had long hair, big sideburns and everything like that. So I wasn't used to that. So he screamed at me, called me Don Johnson, and then forced me to shave dry with like a friggin' 2-blade Bic razor and get that squared away. So that was my first introduction into boot camp, which wasn't that big of a deal. My thought process going into boot camp was, my dad is the toughest son of a bitch I've ever met in my entire life, so none of these guys can really hold a candle to him, and I used to get my ass kicked by him all the time for doing stupid stuff, so what are they gonna do, beat me up? Okay, big deal. So we get to our actual like training battalions, training companies, and I remember we get off, we have our big sea bags, our big duffel bags full of shit, and you got the drill sergeants there just grabbing people and throwing them off, and it was co-ed, so we had males and females. And I didn't know anything better at the time. I just thought that's kind of how it was. But they were, I tell you what, the Army drill sergeants, they didn't give a shit if you're a dude or a chick. They were equally ruthless to the females as they were the males. And they were just jacking people up. We got out there, they're making us do push-ups and all kinds of stuff. I remember we get sectioned out to our specific platoons. And I remember I think it was like 3 drill sergeants. There was like Sergeant Hunter, Sergeant Riley, and Sergeant Robinson. And they were just ruthless as shit, fucking us all up, making us do all kinds of freaking crazy PT stuff. I remember there was like, we had all of our gear inside of our bags. We get up to the squad bay, and this is like October, so it's cold, and it's in South Carolina, so it's cold at the time. They had us up there, and I remember we had our sea bags, our duffel bags, all of our shit in it. We picked it up above our heads. And again, I was big on weightlifting prior to that, like squats, deadlifts, and bench press. So I was used to lifting heavy weights, but you'd be amazed on how much whatever 30 pounds worth of shit can really screw you up when you're constantly doing it. And I learned all about isometric exercises from getting smoked in boot camp there. So that was definitely it was a slap in the face. To wake me up and say, hey man, like you're not in charge of shit. You can't stop. You can't, hey, there's not the door, don't let it hit you in the ass on the way off. No, you're fucking here. You're gonna deal with it. That first night in boot camp proper, in my actual training platoon, it was a male squad bay. So the way it had it, since it was co-ed, you had males from 2 platoons in one squad bay, and then females from 2 platoons in another squad bay. So we're at the very top. We were 3rd platoon. So we shared a squad bay with 4th platoon. So it was all men. So the 4th platoon drill sergeants would come in there and fuck us up just like our own drill sergeants would do. Well, they had this one drill sergeant, and his name was Foxworth or Foxworthy. I didn't know anything about him at the time, but in retrospect, I realized who he was. He was a kind of a shorter, stockier white dude. Seemed older at the time, although he was probably in his early 30s. And he had a bit of an accent. And I remember he went up there and he said something upon the lines of like, essentially, your asses belong to the United States Army now. And that's all there is to it. And you guys can sit there and cry about it or do whatever you want. He's like, but all you're gonna do is get your asses kicked, and you're gonna be here, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's kind of like, I guess, like if you're in jail and they shut that door and they're like, oh man, when those prison doors shut, that's what I realized. Fuck, what did I do? And that's exactly what happened with me. I was like, fuck, what did I do? But like anything else, you adapt, you improvise, you overcome, and it just becomes part of life. A funny story about that drill sergeant is he was an Army Ranger, and I don't mean like I went to Ranger school, but like Ranger Battalion. He had a combat jump, which at the time was like there hadn't been a combat jump in the Army, I believe, since like I want to say Vietnam, and this is 2000. He had a yellow star on his jump wings. He was like in a Ranger Battalion. I want to say he fought in Panama. It was either Panama or Grenada, I don't remember which one, where they had a combat jump. But he was a legit dude, combat infantryman's badge. And nobody had combat infantryman's badge at the time because you're like 10 years removed from Desert Storm. So it was a really, really rare thing, and nobody had a jump star. Like I've seen like 2 since then, and here we are, 30 years later, or 25 years later. In boot camp, it was like this, you get used to something, and they pull the rug out from you and fuck you up. So, but it was cool. Learned how to march, learned how to shoot. I had never been a big gun person prior to that. The M16 was one of the very first rifles that I ever shot. That was super fun. All the obstacle courses. I remember I was really good with those because I wasn't afraid of heights or I wasn't afraid of falling down. It was what it was. There's always things that you do when you kind of get used to, hey, we're going to be up this morning, they're going to play Reveille, you're going to get your ass up in PT gear, and you go out there and get PT and do your thing. We always try to figure out how we could kind of like work the system a little bit, And this is an amalgamation, a group of people from everywhere. I was from Southern California. We had a guy that was like 30-something years old from New York. And he was, as he told us, we were like, hey, dude, like, what did you used to do? He's like, I was a hustler. I was like, what the fuck is a hustler? Like I heard it on rap songs, but what's a hustler? He's like, man, I whatever you needed me to do, I'd do. I'd get this, this, and this. And I remember we had kitchen duty. We had to go work in the kitchen. And, we couldn't eat any of the desserts when we go to chow. You just walk right by them. So they had cakes and cookies, and Krispy Kreme donuts were a big thing at the time. So I remember they had Krispy Kreme donuts, but none of us could eat them. It was just for the actual staff that was there. So every day we walk by. Well, what would they do with all those desserts at the end of the day? They throw the shits in the freaking trash can. So we had like 3 or 4 dudes that were working kitchen patrol. The rest of us were out doing, whatever. I can't remember what we were doing at the time. Shining boots or getting our asses kicked or something, a combination of the two. Well, these guys had pilfered a bunch of these like cakes and cookies and stuff. And I remember vividly, it was 2 types of cakes. Carrot cake, which is to this day one of my favorites because it was super good. and like a white cake with like vanilla or a white frosting and coconut on top. I hate coconut, but it was super good. It was just whatever, you know. So we all go back to the squad bay. We do our thing. We get ready for bed. We get in our racks and we rack out. And all I know is I'm on the top rack, and then someone says, "Hey, it's your turn." I'm like, "What do you mean it's my turn?" "It's your turn. Hey man, go back to the latrine, the bathroom." Okay, so the bathroom's in the very back of the squad bay. And bear in mind, the drill sergeants aren't in the squad bay because we have the 2 squad bays, and there's 1 drill sergeant only between the 2. And I think he was over in the other squad bay. So I go back to the latrine, and there's like 4 or 5 dudes in there, and it's like, I don't know, going into a friggin' illegal arms selling dungeon of some sort. It was crazy because the guy was like, "Hey, Carranza's here." Goes on to the bathroom, like knocks on the like little stall door. Door opens up, and there's a dude sitting there on the toilet with a rack with like a whole sheet of cake, and it was a carrot cake. "Hey man, get some." So I was like, "Oh shit," grab that, and I immediately wolfed it down. And they went to the next one. A guy had the white cake, and it was like, okay, shit. And I remember I took some, friggin' shoved it down my throat, and friggin' went back to my friggin' rack all fat, dumb, and happy and everything. And my rack mate was the platoon guide, like the unofficial person or the official person in charge of us that was a trainee. And he was cool. He wasn't like a snitch or anything like that. But I remember him saying, he's like, "Man, we're gonna get fucked up if they find out about this. Like they can punish us for under this code of under this section of the UCMJ, under this section of the UCMJ, blah blah blah." And we're like, okay, like it is what it is, man. So the next morning, I remember the next day, and as the days go on, the one guy that said he was a hustler, because he was the one that mastermind this whole thing, is like, "Hey man, we bonded over that. And I just remember it was, you know, those little things. We had all this crazy shit going on around us. We're getting, you know, smoked by drill sergeants. We were, you know, going through boot camp, learning how to institutionalize to the military's doctrine and how they do things. You know, you're using ranks and everything. And here we were, just a bunch of, you know, younger guys, and we met in the middle over some cake. And it was pretty cool, you know. In retrospect, I'm like, man, that was fucking nutty. But yeah, I tell you what, it was one of those things where, again, I love sweets. I love cakes and donuts and all that kind of stuff. So when I was in boot camp and I started off, I was like, I remember I almost didn't make the weight cutoff, because I want to say like the weight cutoff, there was like body fat percentage when they used to do the tape test. It was like you couldn't have like above like 15% body fat or something like that. And I had like 16 or 17%, and I had to sign like a waiver or whatever, because I weighed like 215 pounds at the time, because I was, you know, again, like I wasn't working out every day anymore in high school. I was a dirty, nasty civilian doing my thing. And in boot camp, I had got down to like 185, which was fucking crazy for me, because I hadn't been that light since I was like a freshman in high school. So when I saw that cake, I was like, oh, you know, it tasted delicious, man. It was awesome. And you know what? We didn't get caught. So it was crazy for me, because when I got out, of course, you don't notice it at the time. You know, some things fitting loose and stuff like that. But when your family sees it, like, "Oh my God, you weigh so little." And I remember at that point in time, I felt like I could fucking pick up a car and flip it, because I still had strength from when I was doing all the weightlifting in high school, but I was down at a lower body weight, and I just felt so strong, you know. And like nowadays, now that I'm freaking an older guy, you know, and shit, and I see, and my back hurts every day and stuff. I'm like, man, I remember back in the day when I remember I just like would jump on these boxes because I had so much explosive strength because I lost all that weight. It was super cool. Again, I'm in boot camp, and all this, you know, I'm learning how to adapt and everything. And I'm sitting there in formation downstairs in South Carolina, Fort Jackson, South Carolina. It's like December time frame or something like that. It's cold as shit outside. I'm freezing my ass off, and I'm standing in that position of attention. And anybody who's worth their shit learns how to catch a couple extra Z's when you're standing in formation. You got your cover down low, so that way, you know, you're standing at either parade rest or whatever, and you got your eyes closed, catching a few extra Z's. Well, I was doing that, and all I heard was, "Where the fuck is Carranza at? Who's Carranza? Where's he at?" And I'm like, and I was a low-key recruit. My drill sergeants didn't really know who I was. I kept it low-key because I figured this is the best way to go. Don't stand out, right? So I was like, well, this doesn't sound like my drill sergeant. Who is this guy? And he's a Hispanic guy. All my drill sergeants were black. Who's this guy? And he's an infantry guy, because they have, the Army drill sergeants have like an infantry thing on their covers. "Where the fuck's Carranza at? Where is he over here? Get your ass over here." So my drill sergeant calls me out. I go up there, and he's like, "Hey, you know who I am?" And I'm like, I have no idea. I'm thinking to myself, who the fuck is this guy? He's just some mean-looking dude with hazel eyes, Hispanic dude. And his last name's Morales. I'm like, no, Staff Sergeant, I don't know who you are. And he's like, look at my eyes. So what it ended up being is he is at the time was my cousin by marriage. So my dad's brother Art married this guy's mom, Martha, and he was in the Army. He's from the Coachella Valley, so kind of where I'm from. And he had been in the Army since like 1991 or 1990. He joined right after Desert Storm, and he was the infantry, airborne guy, so on and so forth. And he's a drill sergeant at Fort Jackson, Carolina. No clue that he was there. I didn't know this was happening. He sure as fuck didn't know that I was joining the Army. Like, he just happened to be there, and he found out, I don't remember exactly how, I think maybe he found out, like, a family member or whatever, that I was there, and he's like, oh, this guy is related to me, granted me through marriage. So he shows up, and here we are, 4,000 miles away from where we're from, and he's a drill sergeant. He was a drill sergeant in the other company. I want to say I was in, like, Bravo Company. I want to say he was a drill sergeant in Alpha Company. So we shared the same, battalion area. So he came over, he smoked the shit out of me, and just, fucked me all up. But it was cool because, here I was 4,000 miles away from home. And at the time, it was like the first phase of boot camp. Like everybody else in first phase, you're trying to adapt. You're trying to find out who you are, where to get your strength from, how am I going to finish this 10 weeks or whatever it was. And when he showed up, it gave me motivation to do better and to like, hey, you're not going to quit on anything. You're going to handle your shit because you don't want to make this guy look bad. And you don't want him kicking your ass in the process, although he did anyways. And it's always kind of been the way I am. I've always done better when I've had someone to like prove a point to. Hey, I don't want to make that guy look bad. Hey, I don't want to make that girl look bad because they stuck up for me, because they put in for me. I've always done really, really well in those circumstances throughout my life. And that was just one of the very first ones. So it was kind of cool because, again, family member, 4,000 miles away. And I just remember throughout the training cycle, like he would come up and be like, where's that dirtbag Carranza at? And, he's probably way in the back over there in the back of this road march. No, I was in the very front, because I was always like, I was really good at road marching. I was really good because I just, have drive. I'm not very fast, but I'm like a tortoise. I just don't stop. So, but it was cool. And at the very end, he was, hung out with us. And I got to hang out with him like on graduation day and go to his house there on base. So again, and I remember all of my fellow recruits were like, hey, Carranza, like, I saw your cousin down there. He's gonna fuck you up, or hey, he's down there. He's waiting for you, man. He's down there all pissed off and stuff. So it was definitely a crazy experience. So I graduated boot camp. I ended up going to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas, which is like the home of the Army Medical Corps. And my job is a medic, a field medical specialist. So I get there, we do our thing. And again, it's like school. You're going to school every day. You're doing PT, all that kind of stuff. You're learning how to be a medic, learning how to put bandages on people, and give people Motrin and whatnot, tell them to drink water. One of the things that we do when we're there is we go through the Army Medical Army Medical Museum, and it's super cool because as a baby medic, you're going through and you're seeing like all these different medics throughout history, during the Revolutionary War and during the Civil War and all this kind of stuff, and you're hearing all these stories about these medics and doctors that had earned the Congressional Medal of Honor and that had the Purple Heart and all kinds of stuff. And at the time, I was like, oh, this is pretty awesome. It's super cool because you get you get history, and like with anything else, I think you feel more grounded and you have more honor over something when you know the history from where you came from, I think. When you're with your family, if you know who your great-grandparents were, how they struggled to strive to get to where you are, I think you have more honor in your family. And it's kind of that thing where it was the first time, although in boot camp, you do learn about the Army and that kind of stuff and, a little bit of the history, you don't really get a whole lot of it. And it was the first time in my military career at that point where I was like, oh, this is who I am. This is from whence I came from. This is where I came from. Now I've got to make sure that I do really, really good at my job so I can honor these people that came before me. So I thought that was an awesome thing because it's very own museum there at Fort Sam Houston. So it was super cool. So I get assigned to the 437th Medical Company, which is a ground ambulance company. It's out of Southern California, so March Air Force Base is where it was at. I showed up and I didn't know what to expect. Honestly, I had no freaking clue. A bunch of other medics were doing medic things. We're learning how to, deal with ambulances and that kind of stuff. So we learned our vehicles very, very well. But honestly, it was just, hey, this is Cory. Here's your partners. Here's where you're going to be. This is what you're going to be doing. Here's all of your gear. Do your thing, bro. So there wasn't like a big transition like there. I kind of picked it up right away and did my thing. One of the things and the most impactful thing that I was exposed to at that time was a guy named Paul. Um, he was a Japanese kid, Paul Nakamura, who ended up becoming a good buddy of mine. And I had a piece of shit 1988 Chevy Camaro, but that was my car. And he had a 1965 El Camino. So, muscle cars and stuff. So we started getting talking on cars. So we became really good friends based off of cars and stuff. And he became like one of my partners. We hung out, had, ate together, all kinds of stuff. And we just, again, we just bonded. We'd always do everything together when we're at work and stuff. And he was like the yin to my yang. I was like the more serious guy, and he was like the more kickback guy and stuff. So he and I became good friends. Made a couple of good friends in that little community of people. We all kind of had the same things. We liked, cars, and we liked, video games and that kind of stuff. Just kind of those types of things. So it was cool. I kind of lost some of the medical training because we got so hyper focused on the transportation, the ambulance portion of it. Because a lot of times when you're in a combat situation, the line ambulances are taking people from the front and transporting them to like a higher level of care. So yeah, you need to know how to, put bandages on people and assess people and that kind of stuff. You're kind of doing it after it's been done right directly on the line, and you're kind of giving them to like a nurse or a doctor or a nurse practitioner or something like that. So my medical skills kind of waxed and waned throughout, a little bit of time. So that was kind of one of those deals. It was a little bit rough for me because I harkened back to the hospital or to the museum. We're like, man, I want to be out there like learning how to do medic shit, But ultimately, I was able to get some of those skills back and stuff. Again, Paul and I became good buddies, hung out a lot, talked about muscle cars and everything, and life was good. We just did normal day-to-day things, and then September 11th happens. On September 11th of 2001, I was at home, my parents' house in Beaumont, and I was sleeping, and I wake up and I go outside. I go out to the living room, and the TV wasn't on. I turned it on, and the first plane had hit one of the towers, and I was like, "What the fuck's going on here?" And I was watching it, and I was just sitting there, and then the second plane hit, and then of course all the reports were coming out. And you would think that I'd remember everything very, very clearly, but it just seemed like it was like this distant memory now, where like, did I really see it in this way, or did I just watch it on TV someplace, or did I watch it on some other TV station? But I remember the second plane hit, and in my mind I was thinking, oh, like in 1930 something, a B-29 crashed into the friggin' into the Empire State Building. Shit happens. That's what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking like a terrorist attack or anything like that. And I'm watching it, and my dad was at work, my brother Joshua was around, and my mom comes out, and we're watching it. And then one of the first tower falls. I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? And then shortly thereafter was when everything came out that it was a terrorist attack and everything. And I remember I got a call from my platoon sergeant, and she was like, hey, you need to get your ass over here. We're doing accountability formation. Okay, cool, good to go. So for me, it didn't. And again, this goes back to, I may sound like a broken record, but this goes back where okay, this is fucked up. Like, this is horrible. I didn't feel like this overwhelming sense of like, I got to go out there and kill bad guys or do anything like that. It was like, okay, what do we need to do now? This has happened. Okay, is everybody okay? Let's handle what we have to handle. Let's do what we have to do. Let's take care of the task at hand, whatever that may be. And that's how I felt. So it wasn't this crazy grand, big feeling. I've had friends that were like, I enlisted on September 11th or the day after or whatever it is. For me, I was already there. The only thing I did think though was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to go to war. This is going to happen, and I never thought in a million years when I first enlisted that I would be going to war. I honestly didn't think that was going to happen. September 11th happens. We essentially are training hard for the next year and some change. Towards the end of 2002, we get orders that we're going to deploy. We're going to go someplace. We didn't know where we were going to go. We thought we were going to go to Afghanistan. All kinds of crazy shit was going on. We ended up doing a workup in Fort Carson, Colorado. So I tell, we have a big family day and stuff like that. Family members that are in the area are able to go and stuff. And I tell everybody goodbye. We ended up going to Fort Carson, Colorado, and it's up in the mountains, which is because it's by it's in Colorado Springs. So I was like, oh, we're gonna go Afghanistan, right? Because Afghanistan's in the mountains. That's where we're gonna go. Cool. One of the crazy stories that happened there in Fort Carson, Colorado. This is one of my crowning achievements of my entire military career. So we were in the field doing a bunch of field shit, getting all of our stuff issued to us. We're out in the we're out in the field for a number of days, come back, do recovery. It's Super Bowl Sunday. I get super drunk. The next day, the first sergeant's like, "Hey, we're gonna have some team building stuff, and this team building exercise we're gonna do is a scavenger hunt." Scavenger hunt? Okay, cool. I remember when I was in 4th grade and I did a scavenger hunt, but whatever. You're the boss at the top, whatever. So we all break, and we're all in our platoons. We do a scavenger hunt, and we got this whole list of things. I don't remember what was on the list exactly. I remember one thing though. It was get a guide on. The flag. Pole flag and everything. Get a guide on from somebody else. It's not us. We can't use our guide on. Okay, cool. So we had one guy in our unit that had been with somebody else that was on Fort Carson. So he walked over there and was like, "Hey, can we borrow your guide on for the scavenger hunt?" "Oh yeah." And then somebody else did something else, and somebody else did something else, and we were right next to a special forces detachment barracks. So we had I think she was a staff sergeant. She walked over there and she was like, "Hey, can we borrow your guide on? The special forces arrows look us all wazoo." And so she brought it back, and they're like, "Yeah, we got this guide on." And me, in typical me fashion, was like, I'm not gonna get one up by these fucking guys. I'm gonna earn something that's way better than all this shit. So it was me, my friend Paul Nakamura, my friend Chris Salas, and another friend of mine, Richard Rodriguez. So there's us 4 dummies. We leave, we walk. We don't have any cars at the time because we're on, pre-deployment. And we're in Fort Carson, which is a completely, abstract base from where we normally are. And we're walking around and I'm like, "Hey, where's the general's office at? Where's that guy at?" "Oh, it's over here." So I think we walk all the way there. We might have gotten a cab and got over there. I don't quite recall. I think we walked, as a matter of fact. So we walk into the general's quarters, or not their quarters, but their office building, basically the G building. And in the very front, you go through the main doors, and in the very front you have the post general, and then his whoever second in charge, their flag. So a 2-star and a 1-star general's guidons. And I was like, we're gonna take those. We walked in, took both those fucking flags, and walked out. Before this, I remember Paul was like, "Oh man, I don't think we should do this, and we're probably gonna get in trouble for this thing." And I was like, "No, it's gonna be okay. Trust me, it's no big deal, bro. Don't sweat it. It's all good." We took those flags, we unscrewed them, put them together, and we dipped out of there. We get back to our barracks where we're at. We walk in, we put them together, and my first sergeant and my company commander were standing there. They're like, "Fuck." They both walk away like, "We don't want any part of this whole situation. We didn't get yelled at. We didn't get reprimanded." The only thing that I remember happened was the first sergeant came out and was like, "Hey man, you need to fucking take those back before they put this place on lockdown," because they put the base on lockdown over a pair of nods getting missing. I mean, imagine what they're gonna do when the general walks out. He's like, "Where the fuck's my guide on at?" I mean, he probably had no clue what happened, so it didn't really matter. But that was the crowning achievement of my military career, above any of the personal decorations that I received and of anything else, was the day that I walked into the general's general's building and stole his flags, temporarily at least. So there was never any repercussions or anything. It was we flew out to Kuwait a few days later. It was no big deal. And if they did find out, maybe they did, and they're like, "Where are those fuckers at?" "Oh, they're in, Kuwait. We'll go do something over there, So it was one of those deals. We finished all of our pre-deployment training in Fort Carson. We take the long flight from Colorado Springs to Kuwait, and I don't remember how long it was. We were on that fucking plane for forever. So shenanigans, happened on the plane, but it was cool. It was just a nice, way to get out there. We get to Kuwait, and I remember getting off the plane, and it was super bright. That was the main thing. I remember how bright it was in the Middle East in general, in Kuwait, and later on in Iraq. It was super bright, extra bright. So we get there. We get to our we get to our base that we're going to be at. I can't remember the name of it. It was a brand new base at the time. I want to say it was Arif Jan. I want to say there was Camp Doha, which is the main one that had been there since Desert Storm. That was an actual built-up base, which we weren't there. We went to this other camp, and it was a clusterfuck because anything else in the military, is there any planning to do this kind of stuff, or is it kind of hey, we'll figure it out when we get there? And that's exactly how it was when we got there. We didn't have any of our equipment. We didn't have any of our goddamn weapons, or I take that back, we had those at least. But we didn't have any of our our line ambulances. We didn't have any of that kind of stuff. So we get there and we're in this giant hangar with like a billion other freaking people, and we just have cots and we're just sitting there every day. We don't have any like, hey, we're gonna do this every day, we're gonna do this every day, we're gonna do this every day. You guys are gonna go here, you guys are gonna go there. We had none of that kind of stuff. It was like, well, what do we do? So like anything else with boredom, which is like the best thing for any military member, is just absolute boredom and all the time in the world in your hands. People started, getting jammed up and getting into trouble. None of our guys really got really jammed up, but we had some questionable things happen. So it was definitely a process. At some point in time, our chain of command was like, hey, we're gonna cut the company into pieces. We're gonna send these people over here. We're gonna send these people over here. So basically, you would have like teams, 4 people would go and they would go work at this base, at this base. So we had guys from Camp Doha, which is like in the middle of Kuwait City, I believe, to the very front of at the time, like the red line, like the deployment area, between Kuwait and Iraq. And you were doing all kinds of stuff. Some people were doing transports. Some people were working in a medical center. Some people were doing like phlebotomy stuff or like labs and that kind of stuff. So it was all over the place. Some people were just waking up every day, working in medical, like working in like the battalion aid station, doing all kinds of stuff. Like a story that I tell my guys at work right now, because it's always super awesome, is punching boars, man. And anybody who knows about punching boars, it's what happens when you have a whole bunch of military age people, male and female, in an area, and they're away from everybody else. People tend to get in relationships and do what it is that men and women are supposed to do, right? The problem is that when this person has something and that person doesn't have something and they get something, they have to go to the medical station because now they're peeing fire, right? So punching boars is basically when you take a swab and you got to shove it down someone's pee hole. So there was definitely some of that going on. So that was, again, one of the many things as a medical specialist that you may have to find yourself doing. So during my time at Eric John, which wasn't a whole lot of time, there was never any oldest profession in the world activity going on there, needless to say. I think when I got there, I want to say it was like January of 2003, so it had just started going. There was a lot of things going on there, but it hadn't, like, a lot of things hadn't been established, so to speak. I remember like they had like an exchange, but it was basically like a tent with some stuff inside of it. So it wasn't really popping. Now I heard rumors later on that there was all kinds of crazy stuff going on there, but and again, it was multiple forces. We had Army, Marines, and Air Force. I don't think there was any Navy guys there, other than maybe some corpsmen or whatever. But there was never any crazy things, like prostitution or anything like that going on at the time. That I knew of, yeah. Now, there is the underground network of Lance Corporals in the Marine Corps and specialists in the Army that run their own thing. So there very may well have been something going on there, but I had no idea. I was trying to mentally prepare myself, honestly, for the war to start. That was my thought process. I remember my first sergeant would always bust my balls because I was pretty serious, but I wanted to work out every single day to make sure I was physically strong. And I had like whenever we did stuff, like I always wore Nomex gloves because like I always had this fear of like getting burnt to my hands and shit like that, And I was always just ready to rock and roll, man. Like some guys didn't wear plates in their vests. Like I wore level 4 plates front and back every fucking day. It was just how I was. I always made sure my ammunition was counted out and ready to rock and roll every single day. I was prepared for things, or at least in my mind, I think that was preparedness. I think for me, more than anything, it was just me being able to cope with what was going on, me having no control over what the fuck was going on. All I know is that one day we're gonna get called to go do something and go somewhere where I may get killed. And that's what it ultimately came down to. And that was my way of controlling things. It was just like an overnight thing. It was, one day you're there, and the next thing is we're always asking, hey, when's this thing gonna start? When's this thing gonna start? When's this thing gonna start? And then all of a sudden, all of a sudden it was just there. And I remember, driving an ambulance into Iraq, and Paul Nakamura, he and I became partners. Like he was the driver, I was the A driver in an ambulance. And then Sergio Delgadillo, who was our sergeant, he was the A driver in the other ambulance. So they're called field line ambulances. They're Humvees with big medical or with big transportation boxes on the back. So it's Humvee up front, ambulance in the back. They were green because we're going to the desert, so therefore shit needs to be green, right? And of course, we were wearing green mop suits because, again, we're in the desert and that's what we had to have, right? Green mop suits, chemical suits, but whatever. So yeah, so you had like the Humvee up front, and then in between the driver and the passenger seat, you had like a little compartment where you could walk back to the back of the ambulance. And in the back, you had essentially the ability to take care of, I want to say it was like a total of like 4 litter patients, so like non-ambulatory people that are on litters, 2 on each side. And then you could take like up to, I want to say like 8 or 16 ambulatory people that could walk, so they could sit there and you could transform from point A to point B. So it was an ambulance in the back. You had medical equipment back there, IVs, you had bandages, you had all that kind of cool stuff back there. So that's what it was. And it was a big ambulance bay on the back, and on the sides were big red crosses. Those are always good for combat. And that's kind of how it was. And they had the big doors in the back that would open up, and people would come pull guys out and put them on a helicopter, or pull guys out and bring them to a bed, like a gurney or something like that. You know, you do that whole thing. So that's what we were driving in. I remember it being super duper cold and really windy and really, really dusty, because there was a huge dust storm just prior to and at that time. So it was kind of weird. And then it rained. It rained on, I don't know, like the 2nd or 3rd day of the war. Maybe it was like a week or something like that into it. So I just remember it raining, and then we were constantly stopping. We'd get like these missile attacks or whatever, you know, where they say, hey, there might be a chemical agent in the air. Because of course the big story at the time was that Iraq was going to use weapons of mass destruction, meaning chemical weapons, against, you know, allied troops coming into Iraq and stuff. So we were always like super freaked out. I remember vividly the very first time we had one of those attacks. Paul and I, you know, donned your mask and everything, and I was putting my boots on, and my boots were smaller than my foot was, so I couldn't put my goddamn boots on at all. And I'm a size 11, and I was wearing boots, like not like, you know, I was wearing combat boots. I wasn't wearing, you know, just my slippers or whatever it was like. So fitting a rubber boot over an actual combat boot that is smaller than your combat boot, we all know how, like, anybody who's had to do it, it's very difficult to do when you have one that's bigger, that's proper sized, let alone when it wasn't proper sized. So here I was, regular boots on, mask on, hood on, and everything. So I'm like, well, hopefully nothing crazy happens, and, you know, some shit gets in through my feet. I'm gonna be fucked over here. So we're, you know, dealing with that whole thing, and then all of a sudden one day we didn't have to wear the suits anymore. So it was one of those things where, as a young man, I was like 20 or 20. I take it back. I was 21 years old at the time, where I realized that not everything is as it seems, and to always, at the very back of your mind, remember, like, or I don't want to say to question everything, but at least have that part of your brain that says, hey, you know what? If this doesn't pass a smell test, just start thinking that this may not necessarily be what it actually is. In the military, you're taught to follow orders no matter what. And that's how it's supposed to be, especially in combat, because if you don't follow orders, then people die. But you also need to remember, you know, that, hey, this may not necessarily be what it is, so that you're cautious of things at all points in time. So it was able to help me survive.
What do you mean by that specifically?
So, you know, I guess always have a backup plan, and always be leery of something that may seem so for sure. We were so for sure that there was going to be a chemical attack. We had all these different things on. However, one day we just were told we didn't have to wear anything. So I always thought to myself, like, wow, like, do we, you know, is this really what it is, or is there something more behind there? And just to always keep your head on a swivel, I guess, that was my thing, is always make sure that you have a backup plan to something, so that way you can properly deal with the situation at hand. I feel as if that helped me a lot later on in my life, in my later on career, because people tend to have problems when they're so rigid and stuck in a way, like, I'm dressed right dress every single day, and the second that something's not dressed right dress, my whole world falls apart. But you got to have in the back of your mind, hey man, there might be a day where dress right dress doesn't apply anymore, and you got to kind of go off the rails a little bit, and that just makes you able to adapt a little bit better. So we were, our mission myself, Paul, Sergio, and Andy's mission, we were attached to a military police company, and our job was to take injured people from point A to point B for like hello medevacs. We also had a battalion aid station that we helped run, and we also ran our missions within the local area. What ultimately ended up happening was we landed at a convoy support center or convoy support spot. It was called Scania at the time. I believe it's been renamed, if it's even, actually it's not even there anymore, but it was renamed afterwards. It was off the main supply route 1, MSR 1. And we had like a gas station and a bunch of stuff there. We're with a bunch of, we were doing like convoy support with the military police, making sure people were getting pointed to point B properly. And myself, Paul, Sergio, and Andy, we would also help out like on little missions, going out to the different villages and stuff and providing, food and stuff like that with people, water, doing like little aid missions, because we had eventually we were able to get a doctor, like a surgeon, and a nurse practitioner, I believe is what she was. Or she might have been a physician's assistant now that I think about it. So they're both in the Army, and we would go and provide aid at villages and whatnot. We'd also run, different little missions into Baghdad proper and the outskirts. We would take people into hospitals that needed to be transported, like military members that needed to be transported into hospitals. And it was ultimately, it just depended on what we were going to do on any given day. As a medical person, you're valued. You have a very high value on you. So it was us. We were with a bunch of MPs. MPs were functioning essentially like infantrymen at the time, going through, clearing out bad areas, looking for bad guys. At the time, it was, we were looking for members of like Saddam Hussein's party. We're looking for Saddam Hussein himself and whatnot. So intel gathering and whatnot. So they valued us. If we ever wanted to go with them on this particular mission, we can go. If we want to go on them with this one, we can go. And, we would go out and we'd help, people that had been there that were, where there was direct combat going on, people that were getting injured. So we did have the opportunity to do that as well. I was more myself and Sergio, our squad leader. We were both we both had maintained all of our certifications as like EMTs and stuff. So we're more the medical people. So there was an attack on one of the smaller, like little forward operating bases that were in our area, right? So they're in direct and indirect combat. So I think they were getting mortared, and they were also getting machine gun fire. So we ended up going out there to help aid in that. There was a specific individual. He was burnt really bad from mortar fire and stuff. We ended up carrying him from point A to point B out of like this little fire area into a non-fire area. And he was fucked up, burnt really, really bad. And the one thing that I remember on this guy is that he had sergeant major chevrons on, right? So here he is, like one of the highest enlisted, or the highest listed rank in all of the military, for the Army at least. And he was involved in this direct combat situation. He was burnt to shit, and I thought he was gonna die. We ended up giving him like a whole bunch of morphine. And what you do with the morphine at the time is you can't give it in a burn patient, you can't like run an IV on them and all that kind of stuff. You have to give it to them interosseous through the bone. So we're sticking syrettes of morphine straight into his chest in order for him to, not be in excruciating pain, and bandaging him up. And it was one of those things where, again, at the time, it was, I guess it was crazy if you want to look back on it, because there was all kinds of chaos and stuff going on. He was unconscious initially, and then before he flew out, and this is why I knew what his name was, and it kind of goes back, it'll circle back to another story later on. He was burnt, and I was just thinking to myself, like, okay, well, let's just take care of him to the best of our ability and get him flown out of there, because I don't know if he's gonna die, I don't know if he's gonna live, whatever the situation may be. Before he got onto the helicopter, so they call a medevac out. Black Hawk helicopter comes, we bring him over to the helicopter, and he's got this syrettes of morphine sticking in. And I said, Sergeant Major. I was talking to the flight medic, and he says, and I remember he like looks up and he says, Gongora is his last name. It was kind of a strange name. I didn't know this fucking guy at all. Like, it was just a person that I was taking care of at that particular point in time. So, take him, fly him out, resupply, and go back at it. And that was essentially, what we would do would be, 100% reactive to anything that went around. So not to get too far ahead of myself, but I ended up running into later on in the hospedal when I was a patient in the hospital. Okay. There may have been some smaller ones prior to that, but that was the one that I remember vividly. I think it had a lot to do with the fact that he was such a high rank. The fact that it's definitely an experience when you're shoving needles into someone's sternum, because it's not what you're taught. You're taught to start them in the arms and start IVs in the hands, and maybe you like put it into their shin bone. That's a good way to, for an interosseous IV or application of medication, but never through the sternum. But that was all that I had, because he was so badly burnt in other areas and he was all fucked up. So that was the best place for me to use, and it was right then and there. And, I was always the type of person to kind of overthink things. Where's this going to go? How's this going to go? What are we going to do here? And Paul, my buddy, was like, hey, bro, let's just put it in his freaking sternum. Oh, fuck, that makes perfect sense. He was he was one of those guys. I didn't think he was as good of a medic as me, medical-wise, but he was really good about thinking on his toes, really good about that. Or better than me, at least, so. But that was kind of what we did. I remember there was a mission that we were doing, and it was just, I don't think Paul was with me. It was just me by myself, and I was with a major, and he was an intel guy. He was in charge of intel for the battalion, and we were going to these different places, like these different small villages and stuff, and finding out, hey, where's the weapons at? Where the guns at? Where the bad guys at? And we're going to this one village, and it was myself, him, and I want to say there was like a captain or something like that, or maybe a lieutenant. And the major's inside, we're standing outside, and at the time in Iraq, there was these massive piles of unexploded ordnance everywhere, it seemed like. You had burnt out tanks from the Gulf War, you had burnt out tanks from the current war, you had all kinds of weird shit everywhere. You had these massive 6-foot piles of unexploded ordnance. It's grenades, freaking mortars, who knows what was in there. But there's these big piles just chilling out there in the middle of the desert. And I remember standing by one, probably within about 20 feet. And it was hot as shit, middle of June, 100,000 degrees outside. I want to say and again, I could be wrong about this, so someone had to fact check me on this, but I swear it was like 130 degrees outside, somebody had said. I just remember it was super duper hot. And I'm standing there, and I look over, and I'm like, is that smoke? No, that's not smoke. That's a fucking optical illusion. There's no way there's smoke by that giant pile of UXO. There's no way. And I looked back over, and it was so hot that something had glared off of something, and it started a fire on a shitty little bush next to this giant pile of unexploded ordnance. So I look at this, again, I remember if it was a captain or a lieutenant, and I'm like, oh, fuck. And we grabbed the major, and we friggin' boned out of there, man. Jumped in there was like at least two of us, two vehicles, and we just boned out. And I don't know if anything exploded or anything like that, but I just remember it was very vividly that it was so damn hot that it was literally lighting piles of UXO on fire, and we didn't know if it was like gonna blow up or something like that was gonna happen. It was super crazy. I just remember it just, the heat was that intense. So we provided aid to the local communities whenever they needed it. We would go out and, provide, certain levels with like I said, we had the doctor and the physician assistant. There was one day where we had like a young child who had a wound from some combat-related stuff, and he ended up getting a really bad infection, having seizures and stuff. And I remember myself and Paul, we went out there to provide aid for this kid. And again, my thought process at the time was, hey, you know what? All of our stuff should be for us. Like this specific thing is for us, me and you, my partners, and so on and so forth. We don't need to be giving it to everybody else. Why do we need to give it to this kid or help this kid or whatever it is? I kind of laid out in my mind, like, no, I need to be callous towards these people, and I need to be, take care of my people. And we were treating this kid who was having seizures and everything, and Paul and I ended up getting in a little bit of an argument over it, just because he wanted to treat everybody the same, and I wanted to keep everything for us, type of a deal. This kid didn't have really bad injuries, but he had some bad problems later on because of these injuries. And even though he was a child, like I want to say he was probably in his early teens, late grade school, early teens time frame, I didn't really care. It was just whatever to me. It was just another patient to take care of that we had to take care of, that we were being told we had to take care of. And to me, it was just I didn't care. All I wanted to do was take care of our people, because I knew that when the hammer was going to fall, that it was going to fall hard, and that we needed to have all this stuff, medical equipment, and so on and so forth, for our people. Period. So it was June 19th of 2003. I say 2020, 2003. We have a staff sergeant who breaks his leg, and he needs to get transported to a hospital. A combat support hospital is what we called them. I don't remember which one it was. I want to say it was the 18th. But needless to say, we load this gentleman up. Paul and I had this fight the night or the day prior, 2 days prior. Normally he drove and I provided the medical care, but in the back of these ambulances that I didn't talk about before there's actually like a little bit of air conditioning. So it's nicer in the back than there is in the front. And again, I think it was like 100 million degrees outside, or 130 degrees. So I said, hey man, you can sit in the back, take care of the patient. I'll drive us to this combat support hospital. So we're driving, and it's I don't know how far away it was exactly, but it seemed like it was forever. So it was us, and then we had a security vehicle behind us. So the security vehicle consisted of a driver, an assistant driver, and a person on I think they had a squad automatic weapons, so a machine gun in the turret. So it was us. We were driving, and we had been through this area a few times before. No problems whatsoever. You go through a couple like small little villages, but it isn't anything too crazy. The ambulance that we're in, the ground ambulance that we're in, we had the big red crosses on the side, so you can see it's coming from a mile away. We're driving through this little area, and I'm not paying attention because there's nothing in front of me, and the only person behind me is our security vehicle. And all of a sudden, like, just feel this huge explosion. And I immediately knew that I didn't know, at the time we weren't really running over IEDs, so it was pre-IED time. And I was like, dude, we got fucking shot with an RPG. Or something happened like that. And I remember telling myself, fuck, you're dead. Because that's what I thought, because I just saw this big flash of fire. The explosion tore my helmet off. And I was like, I'm fucking dead. That's it. And then I snapped too, and I was like, oh, fucker, you're not dead. But I remember looking down at my feet, and pieces of the Humvee were on fire, like down by my feet. And I was like, well, I have my feet still, so at least that's a good thing. And I remember my hand had melted to the steering wheel because it was all fucked up. But I had these Nomex Kevlar gloves on. They had the fingers cut off, but right here, so I just tore that off, which tore like the skin off my fingers off. Tore that glove off, and I had no power steering because it went through my instrument panel and probably busted my serpentine belt. And I'm like, fuck. So I remember I was like using all my strength and everything to like pull the ambulance back onto because I went onto the side of the road, pull the ambulance off the road, and I grabbed my radio to see if I could radio my security vehicle to see if they're even fucking still back there, and that was fucked up. But then I look at my side view mirror, and it was like smoke. It was like a movie. I remember them coming out of it. I was like, okay, they're still there. So I just floored it, which I wasn't driving very fast because everything was all messed up. And I remember yelling because remember I had said that in between the front compartment and the rear, there was like a door. Well, that had been kind of lodged and all fucked up and everything. So I was yelling, I was like, hey, are you guys okay? Are you guys okay? And at this time, we start receiving some more direct fire. No RPG, but just small arms fire. You can hear it, and it's a shit show. So I'm like, you know what? What's the best way to get out of an ambush, right? You just drive right through it. So that was my thought process. Like, oh, I'm going to drive this friggin' thing through this whole situation until I stop hearing shooting and I'm able to get to a place where I feel more safe to properly assess the situation. I don't know what's going on with the guys in the back. I don't know if anybody's alive or dead or what the situation is. During this engagement, it was an ambush. We were shot with rocket-propelled grenades. There was two. There was one that exploded. That was one that I felt. And there's one that lodged directly underneath my seat that I didn't know about till later on. We're also getting shot with small arms fire. Better said. So imagine I'm on this road. It's probably about the width of a normal road in the States, like a one-way road, but we're using it for 2 lanes of traffic. So it's about the width of a 1-lane road. And then to the left and to the right are just like, open areas. There's no like buildings or anything, but there's trenches, small trenches on each side and maybe a little bit further back. So there's lots of concealment where people could just hide in the bushes and then jump up. And like I said, we had gone down this road a few times before, and this was the only road to the hospital and away from the hospital, because we were relatively close at this point in time, maybe like a mile or two away from the hospital. So people knew that there was ambulances and shit like that coming into this area, and we had big red crosses on the side of this ambulance. So this ambush was set up like, hey, there's a big red cross. Let's go ahead and shoot at that thing. So again, we're here with rocket-propelled grenades and direct machine gun fire. So I was able to drive through all of that, and then I remember seeing some other U.S. vehicles ahead of me. So I stopped. I felt comfortable enough to stop. Pulled off to the side, dismounted, ran to the back. And it was all tore up. The rear passenger side was completely collapsing on itself, and it was just freaking chaos inside of there. And I look inside, And I'm pulling, pieces of the metal off, and I'm looking, like, hey, are you guys okay? Are you guys okay? And then the one staff sergeant we were transporting is like, I'm okay, but this guy's fucked up. He's not doing good at all. So I'm able to look and I can see it. I'm like, Jesus Christ. And I'm like, and at the time I was thinking to myself, okay, we're gonna pull him out, I'm gonna assess him and do whatever I need to do. But then I'm like, oh wait, the hospital's right there. What can I do? I'm fucked up myself. All my gear is literally where he's at right now. I can't get to it. My best course of action is to drive this thing to the hospital. So that's what I do. Get back in, drive it to the hospital. We get to the hospital, and I dismount. I run inside the ER. I was like, hey, we got these guys over here, or we've got some wounded people over here. So they proceed to go out, and I start walking out, and I get pulled to the side by somebody. And they're like, hey, come over here, let us know what happened. And as they're talking to me, when you're dealing with medical stuff, like, when someone's salvageable. When you're triaging people, you have different levels of care, You have like green people that are fine, you have people that are in the yellow that are gonna be okay and they can survive for a little bit. Like the people in the red, and those are the ones that are getting worked on the most. And then you have the people in the black. They can still be alive, but maybe they're just way too far beyond anything that you're capable of doing. And there's a feeling around that. So they bring in the staff sergeant, and they're helping him because he's got some wounds, but he's okay. And then they bring in Paul, and they're not doing anything to him. So automatically, I'm like, well, he's fucking dead. Because I just remember he was tore up. So when he was in the back there, he took off his vest and he took off his helmet. And when the RPG came through, it tore his ass up. It hit him in the head and a bunch of stuff, and it ended up killing him. When I pulled some of the metal back, I could see him, but in my mind, I was like, well, he's just fucked up. Like I need to get him treated. I need to get him taken care of. He'll be okay. Because again, this is a situation where I'm like, well, not that I couldn't fathom him ever being killed or anybody else close to me ever being killed, but at least I thought to myself, like, I don't know how bad of shape he is until I can actually physically put my hands on him and see how bad of shape he's in and whether or not I can do anything at that point in time. So at that time, I was like, no, I got to get this guy. I got to get him out of here and get him to the hospital where he can get actual care because I can't do shit about it. In the back of my mind, though, I remember thinking to myself, like, he's dead. I just, you have this feeling. It's something. Again, when this ambush first took place, I thought to myself, well, you're dead. And then when I realized I was alive, I was like, oh no, you're not dead, fucker. Like, get your shit together and get this whole thing on the road. And then when I went back there, I was like, no, he's not dead. But then in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, no, he actually is. So it was like the opposite of what I was playing out in my own head with my own person. Paul was, he was like a surfer guy, right? He was just a laid back type of a dude. He liked video games, like cars. He was very like, nah, man, don't worry about that. Like, don't get too stressed out about that. I remember I get so worked up about things. He'd be like, hey, bro, like, don't worry about it. It ain't gonna kill you. You'll be okay. He was the optimist to my pessimism. He was like the glass is half full to my glass is half empty. And that's the type of guy that he was with me. He was a very passionate person about the things that he was doing and the things that he enjoyed doing, the thing where he excelled at those things to the 10th degree. I remember being overseas and being in Iraq, and we had like a pull-up bar in the battalion aid station. We had a pull-up bar. And he's like, oh, I'm not very good at pull-ups. Let's just do pull-ups. Every fucking day we'd go out there and do pull-ups. And I sucked at pull-ups at the time. But every day we'd be out there banging out pull-ups, And he was just one of those guys, when he found something that he really liked, he would just pour his whole heart out into it. And he was just like that brother that I never had, because all my brothers are younger than me. I have one older brother, but he was, didn't grow up with me. He was that guy that, that friend that was with me 24/7. That's the type of person he was. He was definitely the optimist to my pessimism. And to be honest, when he was killed, I feel as if part of that passed on to me, because like I was just telling my wife recently, I was like, you know what? I was like, you're talking about the glass is half empty. I was like, I want to talk about the glass is half full. And then she was like, oh, I don't want to hear about it, It was like either just this morning or yesterday, But that's the person that he was. And I have to put this out there. One of the craziest things in my life, we talk about crazy stories, things that have happened in my life. My son, he's 12 years old. I named him after Paul. So Paul's official name is Paul Tokuzo Nakamura. Tokuzo is a family name, kind of like Lee in the South, So I named my son Tokuzo because my brother's name is Paul, and I didn't want there to be like a conflict there. I wanted everyone to know that he was named after my buddy that was killed. So so my son is named after Paul. My daughter, who was not planned, by the way, my wife was on birth control at the time, so one day she just tells me, hey, I'm pregnant. And I said, aren't you on birth control? And she says, no, yeah, not anymore. She was born completely not planned at all on Paul's birthday. Yeah, she was supposed to be born, I think she came 2 weeks early. We didn't plan it. We again, she was on birth control. Like, hey man, I plead the fifth on this one. She got pregnant, and my daughter was born on October the 17th, 2013, which would have been Paul's 31st birthday. It's like the full circle things, like when I was, went through medic school and that whole thing, and then come back, and then Sergeant Major Gongora and everything. It's just this weird how all these things happen. And we think that we're so in control of shit, and a lot of times they're not, man. These are things that happen, and they happen for a reason. Like, yeah, I wish I was still in the Marine Corps. I wish I could have done that. But there's a reason why I wasn't. I met my wife, I had my kids. I applied at literally 100 law enforcement agencies. I didn't get hired with any of them. I got hired with the one I got hired at. And now I'm working in a position where I'm able to affect change on officers, train them properly, bring in that esprit de corps, that stuff that I learned in the military, and bring a little bit of that with me there, and make law enforcement, which has lost a lot of its luster in the public eye over the last 10 years, bring a lot of that back and make it a super fun job, because honestly, like outside the military, it's the Lord's work, in my opinion. When Paul and I first met, it was just he and I. We were together, and I never really knew his family too much. No one really knows each other's families when you're in, because you're separated. When we went overseas and he was killed, I come back to attend his funeral, because it's quite a while afterwards. I come back to attend his funeral, and I meet his family for the first time. I meet at the time it was his fiance for the first time, his sisters and stuff, and I'm brought into this family. And I remember having to tell the story of what happened to the family numerous times. And I remember, like, there was cameras and stuff, like news agencies, and me explaining to his mom how he was killed. It was a difficult thing to do. I had no problem doing it. In retrospect, I think to myself, that was probably a lot more difficult than I probably realized at the time. But that's how I was introduced to the family. Since then, there's been times where we've spent some time apart, but we have memorials for Paul all the time. We just recently had one on Memorial Day around that time, where a bunch of us got together. And he's from Southern California. He's from Santa Fe Springs, so it's relatively close to where I live. And I do talk to his parents and his sisters and his close relative immediate family and stuff. So, and they've been, I tell you what, for the emotional pain that they went through during that time, they've always been they're a beautiful family. That's the best way I can describe it. They're good people, and they're loving people. And every time I see his mom, she just, like when you get a hug, there's a hug, and then you get a hug, and it's a mom hug. And that's what I get from her every single time. I get the mom hug, and it's different. And she's this little Japanese lady, and it's, it's pretty awesome. When the ambush happened, it was a like a big explosion, but it was like in those movies when they get this right in every movie, every fucking war movie there is out there, where you get the loud ringing after an explosion. I swear to God, that's exactly how it was. And that's the one thing they get right in movies, is that the whole ringing, because it's this ringing in your ears, and 20-something years later, it still hasn't fucking gone away, but it's just a little bit less now, Again, I remember like feeling my head, and I could feel the parts of the ambulance just had melted onto the fucking back of my head, And again, my fingers, like I was transfixed on my fingers being so tore up, my fingertips. It was just one of these deals where you get hyper focused on certain things. And then when I was kind of finally able to pull myself together a little bit. And that was, that was when, I was able to pull the vehicle back onto the road and continue to drive despite everything else that was going on. It was like that small moment of clarity, and you were able to kind of function.
Were there any other vehicles with you?
There was one other vehicle, a security vehicle behind me. So a security vehicle behind me, and I remember looking in my side view mirror and thinking, fuck, man, like, where are these guys at? Because I tried to contact them on my radio, but my radio was destroyed, so I couldn't contact them on the radio. We didn't have walkies or anything like that where we had direct comms outside of the radio. And then I just seen them drive through. So they didn't get hit at all. So the insurgents that attacked us only aimed for us. They didn't shoot at them. From my understanding of everything, from what I heard, was that they didn't shoot one round at our guys. They were just shooting at us. So they're specifically targeting the ambulance because they knew it was a soft target. There wasn't any, we didn't have like any turrets or anything like that, or any way of engaging anybody outside of the mirror or outside of our windows, which I'm driving, there's nobody riding shotgun, so I'm not gonna engage anybody at that particular point in time. Again, it was just 30 seconds of mass chaos, or might have been more. Maybe it was a minute, all balled up into one, and it was just this, this experience, this life-changing event that all of a sudden it went from, hey, when's something crazy gonna happen, to, well, it happened, and it happened to you, fucker, So what are you gonna do about it now? I was like, well, he's dead. And there's nothing we can do about it. And at that point in time, I remember, thinking to myself, well, fucking good job there, guy. Like, you didn't even notice anything that was going on. So I started thinking, well, what could have I done better immediately? Then I got pulled to the side by, I think it was 2 people, and they're both Marines. One was a lieutenant, one was a sergeant major. And they're like, hey, where did this happen at? We need you to point out on this map where this happened. So literally, like, I'm still in my burnt up, bloodied up uniform, and these guys are like, hey man, show us on this map where this happened. And I pointed it out and I said, it's over there. And then the sergeant major was like, hey man, he's like, don't worry, we got you. We're gonna go take care of this. And I was like, okay, well, roger that, sergeant major, And he's like, no, I'm telling you right now, this is gonna get taken care of. And I was like, okay. So it was just one of those things that, again, it later on it links into some crazy shit. So they go off, do whatever. I get cleaned up. They cut all my uniform off. They scrape all the. I had really bad. I had second-degree burns, all kinds of burns to my head, my fingers, my back, my arms. Cleaned me up, pumped me full of morphine, stuck me in a bed, and I just sat there, and it was the weirdest thing because it was just like quiet. I was so used to, I remember the country being so bright and everything being so loud all the time, like generators running and fucking, shooting and engines running. It's always loud. Everything's fucking loud all the time. And here I was, now it was relatively quiet. You had some generators and stuff, but it was quiet. I was sitting in this bed and I was just like thinking to myself, what the fuck just happened? Like, this guy's dead now. Like, I just went through this whole situation. Like, well, that was kind of strange. And I remember they brought me this piece of paper I had to write. Hey, we need you to write everything that happened. My fingers were all fucked up because they had no skin on them, so I'm like writing like this, and it was all shitty. We need you to write all this stuff. And then they're like, hey, you're gonna leave tomorrow. Okay, we're gonna fly you out of here. You're gonna go to Baghdad, and then you're gonna go to Germany. I think they told me that at that point in time. So we're gonna put you on a Black Hawk helicopter from here to Baghdad, a C-130 from Baghdad International to Germany, I believe they told me at the time. But before that, they're going to take your buddy out of here. So if you want to say your last words to him, go ahead and go say it now. And I remember I walked in and he was, I think he was exposed to a certain extent. I didn't walk directly up to him. I just kind of like sat down next to him and like grabbed his hand. And I remember this was the time that I got emotional. I wasn't super emotional prior to that. I was still kind of, probably a combination of just calloused and just in shock. But then I was able to show, I was able to give some emotion. And I remember telling him, like, he's dead. Like, you do these weird things. You talk to gravestones, you talk to dead bodies and shit. They have, you're not gonna get anything back, but I guess it's just a way of coping with things. And I said, you know what? I have to live my life for you now just as well as me. And that was it. They took his body, and I left, got on a helicopter, went to Baghdad, got on a C-130, went to Kuwait, and went from Kuwait to Germany. And I get to Germany, and it is like it's like you die. Like I died and went to heaven. It's quiet. It's beautiful. It's summertime in Germany, which I've never been back to Germany, but in my mind's eye, it's beautiful, you know? The weather was perfect, the birds were chirping, the fucking squirrels were out doing squirrel things. I had my own room in a hospital. Everyone was catering, well, I won't say catering to me, but everyone was there, like if I needed anything. Hey, do you need this? Do you need this? Do you need this? You know, I had, like, there was this, she was like a nurse of some sort, little lady, and she was like, hey, I had these bandages all over my arms. I'm gonna need you to take those bandages off, and we're gonna have to get all that skin off your arms there. It's like, okay. Do you want any medication? No, I'm fine. So she starts gripping into this one, which was the worst, and she was just like, and I was like, do you want medication? No. By the time she gets to the end of it, I'm like, fuck, man, I should have taken that medication, you know? Because again, you're tearing off, you know, layers of skin, and it's bleeding, not like gushing blood, but it's the type of bleeding that hurts the most. Like, you know, if you ever like skin yourself sliding into base and you get a big raspberry, it's like that except super deep. And then when the wind blows on it, you can fucking feel every little tiny thing. And that's how it was. And she was screaming. I remember I had that shit melting onto my head, and she was tearing that stuff off. And it was a shit show. But I was like too proud to fucking ask for medication at that point in time, because I didn't want to look like a bitch in front of this little old lady that was asking me for medicine, you know. Yeah, and so I was there for a couple of weeks, but it was just like the most, again, it was like heaven. It's like you died and went to heaven. Now, it wasn't heaven in the sense that angels are everywhere and all that kind of stuff, but it was so peaceful in comparison. I remember Iraq and being there being so noisy. You got airplanes and helicopters and fucking Humvees and generators and people yelling and guys talking shit and all kinds of carrying on and everything. And now I'm in this room by myself in the middle of Germany, in the middle of summertime, where it's beautiful outside and it's quiet. You hear a little hustle and bustle from like nurses going from point A to point B, but it's super quiet. And it's like, dude, this is like perfect to me. This is crazy. Because that's kind of goes back into who I am, is that I like, you know, some quietness. I like kind of being just nice and steady, nice and easy, you know. I went to, when I was in Germany, I didn't have anything, obviously. I didn't have shit on me. They took my weapon, they took my my vest, my helmet, everything when I went from Iraq to Kuwait. I didn't have anything on me. So all I had was like these shitty scrubs that were dirty as hell, and they gave me another set of scrubs. So they're like, hey, we're gonna, we're gonna have you go with some people, and you're gonna go to Ramstein Air Force Base to go get something to wear, and you can hang out for a few. And I remember going into the base, and there was these two Air Force pilots that flew me from Kuwait to Germany. I didn't know them. I never saw them. They're both captains, I believe. But they knew who I was because they had seen me, obviously, like in passing. And they were there at the base. And I was in the like, not exchange, like the eatery, basically, where they had all the food and all kinds of stuff. There's like a little restaurant and shit there. And I remember they bought me lunch and everything. So it was pretty cool. Like, hey, you're the guy that came from Kuwait, blah, blah, blah. So that's cool. I got some clothes, and then they packaged me up. They said, hey, man, you're good to go. We're sending you to Texas or back to the States. So I got on a C-17, which is a huge plane. And it was me and like 6 or 7 other guys. They were all unconscious on stretchers, and they're all being attended to. So they're like critical patients. So the backstory on them is that they were Marines, that they were trying to think of the helicopter. Is it a CH-53, the Sea Stallions, or it's the Marines Sea Stallion? I can't think of what it is. 53. They were on one of those in Africa, and they got hit with some friendly fire, like a 500-pound bomb hit a danger close to them and killed like 3 of them and wounded the shit out of everybody else. So they're on this plane with me flying to the States. So it was pretty nutty. So I'm on this plane, and I remember I had this set of headphones, and I could only wear one because my ear was all burnt to shit on this side, and I was just listening to whatever fucking music I had. And I ended up flying to, of all places, Fort Sam Houston, Texas, the place that I went to medic school, and was at their hospital there, because that's the main burn ward for the United States military, and one of the best ones in the entire country. So that's where I ended up flying to, where all the burn patients go to. I get to the hospital. I spend several months in the hospital, and I'm still enlisted. I'm still doing my thing. So I'm at Fort Sam Houston, and earlier I had spoke about being at being a medic student and going to the museum there at Fort Sam Houston. Now here I am 2 years later, And I went back to that museum, except now I've actually been a medic in combat and experienced some of what some of these people have had experienced. So it was one of those things that it really made me feel, again, more proud of where I came from. So it was a really cool thing. It was kind of like a full circle type of a situation. I was at this hospital, it's Brooke Army Medical Hospital at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. And the sergeant major that I had treated when I was in Iraq was in that same hospital on the same floor that I was. And one day I was sitting there and I was all fucking feeling sorry for myself because I was in this hospital and I couldn't leave. And my family was all the way on the other side of the country and I couldn't go nowhere. There was a sergeant or staff sergeant came in and he's like, hey, fucker, like you're a medic, like you can walk around. Why don't you help me take vitals? Because he knew that I was kind of bummed out. My friend had been killed and gone through this situation. So they put me to work. And I remember I was going to the rooms doing vitals and doing all kinds of stuff. And there was this guy and I was like, Gongora. And I walked in, I was like, hey, Sergeant Major, are you Sergeant Major Gongora? He's like, yeah. And I was like, hey, I was there when this happened. And so he and I had this conversation and everything. It was pretty crazy that, again, these full circle things that keep coming back, you know, the hospital and then this whole situation. So, so I spent some time in the hospital. I don't get separated. I end up healing up and I end up going back to my company back with the 437 for a short amount of time. And that's it. Essentially, I get out towards the end of 2004. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, I'm gonna go be a police officer is what I'm gonna go do. And I applied to a couple of different agencies. It didn't work out. I applied to LAPD. They're like, hey, like, you know, you seem good, kid, but we don't want your kind around here. It was like literally what they told me because of fucking nonsense. I just, you know, not to bash LAPD too much, but it was just a very, very bad experience that I had with a background investigator there. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna re-enlist. I'm gonna go back in, but now they were like giving all kinds of cool stuff out because it's like 2005. Like, oh man, you want to go to airborne school, you want to go to ranger school, you want to go to special forces, you want to do this, and this. You've already got all this other experience. What do you want to do, man? The sky's the limit. And I remember being in Iraq and working with some Marines just on the side, and then I remember being in the hospital and that Sergeant Major Sandoval, and I was like, you know what if I wanted to go into the Marine Corps? So I went to the Marine Corps recruiter, and he's like, yeah, you can go, but you're gonna have to go through boot camp again. And I was like, oh, okay, then I'll go through boot camp again. Yeah, I don't care. Like, what are they gonna do? What am I gonna get? What are they gonna do to me in boot camp that I haven't already been subjugated to? Like, it's not that big of a deal. The curtain has been pulled over away from my eye. I certainly know what it looks like, you know, for the most part. So sure as shit, I enlist, go down to the recruit station in Moreno Valley, which is not too far from where I was living at the time, and enlisted in the Marine Corps. And I literally enlisted and was gone the next day. So I walked into the recruiting office. He was a sergeant. His name is Sergeant, I believe his name is Sergeant Bell. White guy, you know, like just like a local dude. And I was like, hey man, like this is my experience. I'm prior service, but I was in the Army. But I want to join the Marine Corps. He's like, oh, okay. And of course, what does he do? He's like, hey man, let me bring out the Marine Corps values. And he starts laying the whole dog and pony show. I was like, no. I don't care about any of that kind of stuff, dude. I just want to join the Marine Corps. I want to go to, I want to do what I have to do. You don't need to sell me on anything. I'm already here. And he's like, oh, okay. Hey, bring in your DD-214, bring in this, that, and the other, and we'll get you started and stuff. He's like, but you're gonna have to go back through boot camp. And I said, okay, no big deal. I don't give a shit. I'll go back to boot camp. At the time, when I was in the Army before I enlisted in the Marine Corps, I went through like the sergeant's course, which is up in Fort Lewis, Washington. So it's a big deal. And like I graduated like #1 in that entire class. I did really, really well. I was a sergeant at the time in the Army. I was on the list to get promoted to staff sergeant. So I was moving around pretty fast and whatnot. But I was like, no, I'm gonna join the Marine Corps. And he's like, hey, you know, the best we can give you is PFC. And I said, okay, then I guess I'll be a fucking PFC.
Really?
Yeah.
As a sergeant? As
a sergeant promotable that has already gone through the first phase of the staff NCO college and all kinds of shit, or the staff NCO course. You know, I knew what time it was. I'd done some reading and done some research and stuff like that beforehand, but to me, all I cared about was, and as corny as this sounds, and if the Marine Corps wants to use this, they can use it all they fucking want to. All I wanted to do was be a Marine at that point in time. I loved being a medic. I loved my time in the Army. It was fucking awesome. Again, even all the shitty things that happened, I gained so much experience, and there was, you know, again, there was life-changing events that obviously I was subjugated to, that I was, dealing with. I'd been overseas, been to combat, all that kind of stuff. And, I had been, given, my Purple Heart by the governor and all kinds of cool things. But I was like, I want to be a Marine. That's what I want to do. That's my next goal. So I go in, give my DD-214, and he's like, holy shit, dude, like, you sure you want to do this? And I said, yeah, I want to fucking do it. So it was like the recruiter, he was a sergeant, and then they had the gunnery sergeant that was in charge of it. They're all super cool, and they're just like, man, basically, like, why do you want to do this? He kept asking why you want to do it. And I had to get a tattoo waiver at the time. Because at the time, the Marines weren't letting anybody in with tattoos unless you had a waiver. So I had to get a tattoo waiver. So like, I went down to like San Diego, and like I talked with this major, and he's like, hey man, you're good to go. And he gave me a little tattoo waiver and stuff. And then I go to MEPS, do my MEPS thing. And I remember I was at the MEPS in San Diego, which is the same MEPS that I went to when I enlisted in the Army. And I was at the same hotel that I was at. And I was just hanging out, relaxing, because I knew the next day I was going to have to fucking ship out to boot camp. And I remember sitting in the pool, and there was these other kids that were going to ship out to wherever. And this one kid was like, yo, yeah, man, I just listened to the Army as an 18 X-ray, like the Special Forces, generic designator. He's like, man, and they gave me $15,000 signing bonus. And I remember sitting there, and I was like, shut the fuck up, Boot. Like, I don't want to hear about this nonsense, But it was just funny because, again, it was just all this stuff. And here I am. I'm going to be put in the same situation that he's literally going through, going back through boot camp again. So who's really the dummy here? But it didn't matter to me. All I cared about was, is being part of something bigger, being part of a team, and having something different, and do something that not everyone can say, hey, I've done this, or there. I didn't want to go down that road that's more travel, the one that everyone takes. I wanted to do something a little bit different, and that's all I cared about. That was my singular goal, was just to do that. Marine Corps boot camp. I show up there, and nobody knows nothing about me as far as the drill instructors that are there as reception. I'm just some freaking boot that just got off the bus. I get there, get processed in, get to reception, do my whole thing. I'm flying, low. I know that you shouldn't try to stick out. You shouldn't be a turd, but you shouldn't really try to stick out. You got to try to keep that middle ground, man. Keep that middle ground. That's what I was going to do. I was going to go in there and just play the middle. Got sent to my training company, which I believe was Delta Company, and the whole dog and pony show, man. Friggin' the first day was a Black Friday or Black Monday or whatever it is. We get tore up and stuff, and we're getting smoked. One of the differences I noticed between Army and Marine Corps boot camp was this the time of the year I went during the summertime for the Marine Corps boot camp. So there's like 100 and something recruits there. It was insane, and they were just, it was just normal stuff. I remember I was just gonna fly low, and then one day the second hat was like, hey, who here knows how to work a guidon? And I was like, standing there, and one guy said he could do it, and I said I could do it. So they're like, okay, well, you show me how to do it. And the one guy was better at working the guidon than I was. And he's like, all right, well, you're the guide, and you can be a squad leader. So I kind of set myself up for failure there. Was moving along just like a normal recruit. And I want to say it was like the second or third week, because it was before we had like the initial PT and the initial drill and all that kind of stuff. We're out on the PT field doing our thing, and I'm doing push-ups. I vividly remember, and the series commander, who was a captain, he comes over to me, and the series gunnery sergeant is up on the PT thing, doing his thing. The series commander comes over to me, and he starts doing push-ups next to me. I'm like, what the fuck's this guy want? He's a captain. And he's like, hey, Carranza, where were you at in Iraq? And I was like, fuck, man. And I was like, well, like, or he said something upon those lines, like, where were you at, or who were you with, or something like that. And I said, hey, well, this is where I was at. And he says, okay. And he does some push-ups, and then he leaves, and we continue to do our thing. And then one of the drill instructors, I want to say it was one of the series gunnies, starts lighting me up and stuff because he had seen that transaction. So we do that. We go back to the squad bay. We do our thing, shower up, get ready. We have classroom session afterwards. And we go to the House of Knowledge thing. They have the series commander. He walks up and he starts doing his little spiel. And he says, recruit Carranza, come up here. And I freaking get out and I walk my ass over to the very front. And he says, hey, Carranza here was, overseas, was in the Army. He's a combat vet. He's, got the Purple Heart and these other decorations and so on and so forth. But he wants to be a Marine, and that's why he's here doing the same shit you guys are doing. This is the brotherhood that you guys are all in. This is the family that you guys have enlisted in. And this is how important it is to people like him and you and so on and so forth. Basically, he was just using it like, hey, we're all here, we all come from different places, and you guys all want the same thing. And that's what he said. I remember standing there, and the way that the schoolroom set up, I remember the drill instructor standing at the very far end of it, away from me, and it was everybody. And I remember them just freaking staring like daggers through me, or at least that's what I felt. So go back to squad bay, do our thing. The senior drill instructor pulls me into the duty hut and just has a candid conversation with me. He's like, hey man, like, what the fuck, you know, and just letting you know, like, you're gonna be treated like a recruit, but we're gonna expect more from you type of a deal. Which, you know, was fine by me. They put me in charge of a squad, and I just, you know, I just did my thing. I just helped these guys through boot camp. They helped me through boot camp. The second time around in boot camp, I thought to myself, hey man, this isn't gonna be anything. No big deal at all. This is gonna be easy breezy. I'm physically fit. I'm mentally fit. I can do this thing. This is no big deal at all. I noticed that I start getting like injured easy. It's like this weird thing that keeps happening to me. And I noticed it before I got into boot camp and I was like working out on my own. I remember like I fucked my shoulder up and I couldn't do something. And I remember I was doing like 20 something pull-ups, and then I went down like 10 pull-ups. I was like, why can't I? My shoulder's all messed up, man. I was like, whatever, man, I can still do it. But the drill instructors were like, why the fuck can't you do pull-ups anymore? What happened? You're not gaining any weight. You're the same, like you look the same. Well, what happened was during my time overseas, where there was a combination of the RPG attack. We had a big burn pit out by where that CSC Scania was. We were dealing with, UXO that had depleted uranium and that kind of stuff. I developed this condition, this neurological condition, where basically my nerves don't have the proper amount of insulation around them, so I become susceptible to nerve damage, essentially. So that's what was happening. I ended up injuring myself at some point in time in boot camp, and I was losing strength because I lost dexterity and stuff. So whatever, I just sucked it up. But because the drill instructor had kind of like quasi installed me as like a squad leader and platoon guide and stuff like that, I got a lot of respect from the recruits. And yeah, these guys were fucking boot nobodies from bumfuck Egypt, whatever. But there was like solid kids there, man, solid people. And I remember there was a kid from Ranch Cucamonga, his name was Mike Post. He ended up being a good buddy of mine in boot camp. He's a big kid. And I remember like I couldn't pick up my rucksack and throw it on, and he was right behind me. He fucking picked it up and put it on me and stuff. Just like had my back always, you know. So boot camp the second time around was a lot more difficult than the first time around because of the physical issues that I was having. And it really sucked because I couldn't do what I wanted to do. At the time, all I wanted to do was just, go guns a-blazing and have a good time and go to wherever. What I wanted to do was I wanted to deploy and go back to Iraq is what I really wanted to do. Yeah, so I enlisted in the infantry. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go back to Iraq and essentially continue, or I don't want to say finish what I started because I didn't start anything, but I wanted to go out there and be with everybody else. I wanted to go out there and I wanted to fucking kick in doors. And I wanted to go out there and I wanted to fight the good fight and be with the other grunts, be with the line level guys. That's what I wanted to do. That's the only thing I wanted to do. And, I could have probably picked any job I wanted to. I could have, done whatever, but no, that's the only thing I wanted to do. So, again, I ended up getting injured, I ended up graduating boot camp, and the injury just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. I don't want to say I felt more proud, but there was definitely a sense of pride there. But to be honest with you, it was less that, hey, I just graduated Marine Corps boot camp when I graduated Army boot camp, but it was more of like the knowledge. Because when I graduated Army boot camp, I didn't know shit about fuck. Like I didn't know anything. I had no experience in the military. That was it. Other than that, whatever 4 months or 3 months I was in Army boot camp, that's all that I had at that point in time. Well, now here I am in 2005. So now I have almost 5 years total military experience including a combat deployment. And I felt proud because I'm like, yeah, like it's a culmination of everything. It has just come to this right here, and now I have all of this. So I feel proud that I had all that, and now it was showing because. The Marine Corps, it's more of the esprit de corps, more of the brother and sisterhood, more of this is our history and where we came from, and that's why you're proud to be who you are to this day. And yes, there was a lot of that I had, but it was more of everything altogether, not just Marine Corps boot camp. So there was that portion of it. I had these injuries. I need to get healed up before I push through. Everyone that I was with ended up going to 3rd Battalion 1st Marines ultimately. So I was super friggin' butthurt that I had to stay where I was at. Here I was like, okay, I'm going to recover, and then I'm going to go do my thing. I'm going to be a little bit delayed, not that big of a deal. Because I want to say at the time, the enlistments were 5 years. So I was like, I got plenty of time. You know, I can just heal up and do my thing. Well, this injury wasn't getting any better. It turned into the point where like I could barely lift my right arm above my head. And so they put me with like a medical rehabilitation platoon. And ultimately, when I get there, like it's like anything else. I have like a staff sergeant and a gunnery sergeant and stuff, and like, oh, you're a prior service, you have this experience, you're going to be in charge of all these freaking guys. So that's ultimately what it came down to, which I was, you know, which was great because I wanted something to do every single day. I didn't want to get lost in the sauce or anything like that, which was good. I ended up working at the recruit depot. I ended up working with the recruit training regiment, so helping in various areas, running working parties, stuff like that, whilst dealing with the medical aspect of it. So like when it deals with neurological stuff, you have to go through all these little different things. They like, you know, MRIs and EMGs where they like put little needles in you and shock you and see how your nerves are responding to the stimulus and everything. And eventually it got to the point where I'm like, well, you know, what's going on? What's the end goal here? Because we're like 6 months into it, a year into it, and so on. And they're like, hey, man, like, we may have to send you to a medical, we may have to send you to a medical separation board to see if you're even able to, if you're viable, if you can do this. And I said, okay. So my thought process is like, okay, well, what I'm going to do, because I started to recuperate. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to work my ass off. I'm going to do a PFT, an official PFT. I'm going to, you know, qualify. I'm going to go to McMap, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to do these things that every other devil dog's out there is doing to show these guys, hey, this guy can move on to the next phase, the next level. So I do that. I'm in good shape. I'm out there running. I'm like at like a 280 PT. I go through the McMap instructor program. So I'm working and doing all these different things and making all these different relationships with different people on the base, right? So ultimately, I go in front of a medical separation board, which, and again, my knowledge on this isn't 100%, but from what I recall being told, was it consists of 3 individuals, like a Navy doctor, 2 Navy personnel, and then one Marine officer, right? And again, they're involved in medical whatever. So they sit there and they say, hey, is this person good to go or not? Ultimately, what it came down to is they said, hey, no, this guy's no good. We got to get rid of him. So here I was 2 years later into my enlistment, a little less than 2 years, and I'm out. And now I'm a nasty civilian again. My plans when I joined the Marine Corps were to go overseas and fight and fight in combat. When I enlisted, the Battle of Fallujah had already taken place, and I remember reading these articles about it, and I remember thinking to myself, I wish I was there. I wish I could have been there to help with that. And it was a huge bit of regret that I had. I'm like, why couldn't I have been there? And regret is a thing that I dealt with a lot. I wish I could have done this better. I wish I could have done it better. I wish I could have been there. Why couldn't I have been there? And that's all I wanted. I just wanted to be there with everybody else. I wanted to be with a team of other men. Going out there and doing the Lord's work is what I wanted to do. That's the only thing I wanted. So I enlisted. And my thought process was I'll do an enlistment and then I'll transition over through one of the various programs that they have and become an officer. Because they had this captain, he was a company commander, where he was a sergeant, he was like a drill instructor, and then he went through one of the programs and became an officer. And I was like, that's what I want to do because we need good officers out there. And I was like, I'm going to do 30 years because that's where I can get the maximum amount. I'm going to do as many deployments as I can. I'm going to dedicate myself to country and to my people. And then all of a sudden, within days, I'm done. No more. And I only had one plan. I didn't have a plan B or a plan C or any of that kind of stuff. It was just a plan, and that's plan A, and that was B again. And I was either going to retire after 30 years or get killed in the process, one of the two. And that was my mindset at the time. I transitioned back, and it's like this thing that you were good at, because regardless of the injuries or anything like that I had, I was always good at my job. I was dependable. I would do what I was told to do. I was independent when I needed to be independent. I was subservient when I needed to be subservient. I was a good worker, and I made friends easy. And it was just, I fit into the military easy. And I loved that lifestyle. And again, next thing I know, I was out of it. So it was extremely difficult for me. I moved back to Banning, or Beaumont, better said. So the same place that I grew up in. Never thought I'd ever be back there again as far as like a long-term situation. And I struggled. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was like, okay, I'll be a police officer. It's like I applied with like a million agencies, and nobody would touch me, because on my DD-214, on my re-enlistment code at the very bottom there, where it's like a 1 or 2 or 3, like one you can re-enlist no matter what, 2 you can release you can get re-enlisted sometimes, and 3 like you're no good because either you got separated like an other than honorable, or in my case a medical condition. So when I would get to the point in like a background process with the police department, I'd give them that DD-214, and they'd see that, and then I'd get the letter associated with, hey, thanks but no thanks type of a deal. So it sucked. And it was, I didn't notice it at the time because my feelings were so numb. I was like, okay, well, whatever, on to the next thing. Move on, suck it up, drive on. You'll figure something out. But the problem was that there wasn't anything else. I didn't know what the fuck to do. I ultimately ended up getting my EMT license back from when I was a medic, way before, working on an ambulance for an ambulance company, and that was kind of cool, and wore a uniform and that kind of stuff, which kind of filled the gap. But I wanted to be back with like-minded individuals that were like, A-type personalities and gung-ho, and I wanted that paramilitary or the military type of feeling, because I had no purpose. It felt like I wanted that so bad, but on the other end of it, like I had to like create this like fake persona, so to speak, where it was like I was happy, like doing all the other shit, but I really wasn't. And the only way that I could be happy is if I had, whatever that other experience was. In this case, like I wanted to be a police officer. So I really struggled with that ultimately. I ended up putting myself through the academy because nobody would hire me. I was also still working on an ambulance, so I went to essentially the extended format of the academy. There's 2 formats. There's one that's every single day, 4 to 5 days a week. There's one that's 3 days a week for twice as long, which is like either 6 months or a year. So in our case, it was a year. Put myself through the academy, or during the academy, I was doing really, really well. Same thing, whenever I had gone to the boot camp, whatever, I did really well. Same thing in the academy, I did really well academically, physically, and so on and so forth. During the course of the academy, I was married. My ex-wife and I got a divorce when I was in the academy. So it was one of those things where, yes, I was in the academy, but on that same night, I was dealing with shit on my personal side. And that relationship, which started when I was in the military, so my ex-wife and I met in high school. We were married shortly afterwards, but we were never together for long periods of time because she was in school, I was in the military, and it was like that living separate type of a situation. When I got out and I was transitioning to the civilian life, now she gets to meet the real Cory, the one who's probably suffering from some untreated mental problems, through depression, through these different types of things. But what do they teach you when you're in the military? You got to suck it up and drive on. That's all fucking nonsense. That's a figment of your imagination. You just got to work out harder. You just got to push harder, shoot better, so on and so forth. So there's no treatment plan. I wasn't treating myself. I wasn't self-medicating or anything like that. But what I was doing is I was compartmentalizing everything. So every negative thing that was happening to me, I was just sucking it up and driving on, sucking it up and driving on. Well, eventually, sucking it up and driving it on turns into explosive anger and explosive, exploding relationships, exploding friendships. And that's exactly what happened, because my ex-wife wasn't meeting my expectations that I wasn't telling her. So then she went out and just lived her own life. And then we separated, broke up, ended up getting a divorce. And here I am in the academy. And now I've got to deal with the mental repercussions from that. And I've got to deal with the academy stuff. And I also got to deal with working. So ultimately, I ended up graduating the academy and didn't get hired on with anybody else afterwards. I ended up working for an Indian reservation in San Bernardino, which is near Beaumont, where I was living at the time, or Banning, better said, I was living at the time. and they're they have a certain like level of experience you have to have, like military police experience, or you have to have like a law enforcement academy. So I fit that, and it paid well. At the time, I was dating a beautiful woman that I met in the academy, who eventually became my wife. I don't know how I pulled that one off, but somehow I did. And although these issues that I had with my previous relationship, as far as not talking, pulling everything in, and just blowing up, and just being self-destructive, they transferred over to her too. The difference, though, is that as opposed to being standoffish, she decided to put me in a position where she was there to help me no matter what. So it's kind of like, being in the military, where you had a person that had your back no matter what, right? So it helped me out a lot at that particular point in time. So I worked for San Manuel, and I ended up getting hired with a law enforcement agency in the area eventually. But it was only due to complete set of circumstances that I had laid the groundwork for years before. I had worked for an ambulance company. I'd worked in a city. When I worked for that city, I was like, man, this city's fucking rough. All kinds of shit's popping off over here. And then I ended up working for San Manuel, and then this guy comes in, he's like, hey, I used to work for that city. I retired out of there. Do you want to go work over there? And that's essentially what it was, and he was able to get me through there. I went through their background process. They saw the medical issues. I proved to them that I could physically do the job, getting like second medical stuff and signatures from 1 million people and stuff, and I ended up getting hired with them. And it was just like this thing that I always wanted to be part of. It was awesome. I go in there, I had a lot of experience doing other things in the military, being part of the emergency medical community, and I thought I could bring all that stuff into my law enforcement career and just make it that much better. So one of the things during my transition, and when I say my transition, I don't mean like the months and months after going from being in to being out. I'm talking about years, because I'm at the point in my life now where I'm 43, so I got out when I was like 24, 25, something like that. So I've almost been out as long as I was. You know what I'm saying? Like there's almost been an entire lifetime since then. So I'm able to reflect back on that and be like, okay, well, where am I at now in comparison to where I was then? And a lot of these underlying issues that people have, that I was having at the time, depression, anxiety, survivor's guilt, which is a huge one. I always felt bad about what happened to Paul, because he was in the back when I normally would be. Now I was in the front and he got killed and I didn't. And I felt as if I really let him down, because I remember telling him, like I said, like, I gotta live for you and me. But here I was, like almost 30 years old. I had been divorced. Like, I didn't have a fucking dime to my name. I had put myself through the academy. Nobody wanted to hire me. I wasn't in the military anymore. I couldn't do the one fucking thing that I really wanted to do, the one thing in my life. And I was just like a complete fucking failure. Like, I had nothing to show to Paul whenever I pass away that, hey, bro, like, I lived a good life for us both. And that really fucked me up mentally, in the sense that, like, hey, you're alive, but you're not doing shit with your life. And there'd be days I just like lay there like, hey, should I even get up out of bed? Okay, I'm up out of bed, but what do you want to do? Nothing? Okay, well, would the world be a better place if you weren't here? Those types of things, every day. And I knew the answers to those questions, but I think one of the biggest things that with certain people when they're dealing with these issues is, if you're self-aware, like, hey, like, yeah, I have these problems. This is the way that I fix them, but I choose not to. It seems like it's worse, and then you feel like more of a failure. It's like a vicious cycle, where you know what you're supposed to do, but then you don't do it, but then you feel bad for not doing it, and then it just fucking goes like this. And even if you do these good things here and there, you never feel like it's quite enough. Even if you start to get off the cycle, you never feel like it's quite enough. And in the post enlistment world, you're hearing of things as you're getting older of veterans committing suicide, at an alarming rate, and you're like, well, how can I not only just make sure that I don't become one of those statistics, but how can I help other people? How can I get a better understanding of this? Talking to people, to other like-minded people that were in those similar situations, those types of things. But even then, it always seemed like I would do well, and then I'd turn around and fucking self-sabotage that whole situation. And that's exactly what I ran into for years. And it's been a situation where just up until, the last couple of years, I seemed like it was a constant cycle of I was doing great at work, and that was the one thing that I had to rely on. Is I always did really good in work because I had um, a good friend that I worked with that ended up becoming my boss, and I always wanted to make sure I didn't embarrass him. So I'd always work my ass off extra. So I always had that. But a lot of the other things, it was kind of a train wreck where I like self-sabotage my relationship with my wife, self-sabotage my relationships with friends. But the people that are closest to you tend to take the biggest brunt of that. And I always knew that, hey, like you need to do one of two things. You either need to completely separate yourself from everybody, or you need to, and what I mean by that is like, like divorce your wife, get custody or split custody with your kids, all that kind of shit that nobody wants to do because it's painful. Because I ended up having 2 children with my wife, and they're one of the best things that's ever happened to me. But I didn't want that. I wanted that. I wanted that structure, that consistency that I had when I was a child, or that I wanted when I was a child, better said. Mom and dad, myself, my wife, my kids. I wake up every day. We could talk to her. I could talk to her. She could talk to me, because we were best friends. It was just that I wanted to be an asshole and destroy all that, because I felt as if like I didn't deserve it. I didn't deserve to be happy, or I felt as if maybe like, I wasn't living life the way that I should, or whatever crazy situation that we come up with in our minds. And that's how it was. And then and then in my law enforcement career, I start to move up in rank, and I go through a leadership program. It's like a prestigious leadership program. It's a Sherman Block leadership program that, like, if you want to promote from sergeant to lieutenant type of a deal, that's usually what you go through. And I went into it not expecting much, because I'm like, okay, what are you going to teach me about leadership that I don't already know, But I went into it, and one of the things, it affects everybody differently. One of the things that it taught me was something I already had, and that's service to others. And when you serve others, you serve yourself. And it's like in the family. Like a man, in my opinion, needs to take care of his family, and he needs to take care of his kids. And by doing that, there isn't anything else that man can do that's going to give him the gratification he's going to get from taking care of those 2 things. And I took those things and I put them into my life. And as opposed to being angry, and as opposed to being depressed all the time, and as opposed to being like, self-destructive and that kind of stuff, I went from that to, hey, I'm going to be a leader of my family, and I'm going to put all that I have into that. And that's been the way that I've been able to completely transition from the military back to the civilian world, and kind of incorporate the best things from a little bit of everything, from both of those, better said. And it's made me, in my opinion, a better man, a better friend, a better husband, a better father. The veteran community, I think we're scattered out, especially those of us that participated in the Iraq and the Afghanistan wars. We're a generation of men and women that I think that there wasn't a whole lot expected of us, like the millennials and the end of the Gen Zs. And now, and we were subjugated and dealt a lot 2 wars at the same time, a lot of crazy shit that happened, and we're very spread out. The biggest thing that I found, outside of being service dedicated to my family and to the people that are closest to me, the biggest thing that has helped me out with my own personal problems, dealing with post-traumatic stress and depression, has been congregating and breaking bread with my fellow veterans. And it doesn't matter if they're combat vets, if they're not combat vets. It's the best thing that we can do for each other as a veteran community. And if we can go out there and talk to one veteran, whether we know them or not, or whether in the same branch or not, and just bust some balls and talk talk shop or whatever it is, and that helps them get through one day, and that helps them change their mind about doing something they won't be able to take back, then that's something that we need to do more of. We need to stop sucking it up and driving on, and start doing things that are going to be productive for ourselves. And that's by, talking to people, relying on people, and just not being quiet. Because ultimately, if you're quiet, like I really think that how many veterans have died by themselves alone, quiet, because they were told just to suck it up and drive on. Well, that can only last for so long, and eventually you've got to do something, and something's got to give. And we just have to be there for each other. So That's really, my biggest thing.